And so different groups on the island began to compete with one another to build more and more stone heads than the other groups. There ended up being 900 of them, some of them 30 feet tall. I mean, tower, what is that, 3 stories tall. It's almost unbelievable. But there was a problem, and that is that there was only one quarry on the island. And so in order to build this incredible amount of heads and move into different parts of the periphery of the island, they had to figure out a way to cut down trees and use them as rollers to move the stones around the island. Okay, so as they engaged in their sort of mad head-building projects, in only a few generations they managed to entirely deforest this once verdant island covered in tropical forests. And if you look at pictures of Easter Island today, it basically looks like scrubland. It looks like someone literally mowed the lawn around the island, right? What's interesting is that we assume that is sort of the natural state of the island, but in fact, it's the clue to the collapse itself, which is fascinating to me. And of course, it was strange because the people must have known, right, that things were not going well as they were eating through their own ecosystem. I mean, after a while, we know that they didn't have enough wood to live in their traditional houses anymore, so they had to live in caves. We know that their diet changed dramatically because they used to hunt and forage in the forest, and suddenly those species collapsed. We know that they were also farmers, but because of massive deforestation and the collapse of floral ecosystems, springs on the island themselves began to dry up, and they could no longer irrigate their crops. And because there were not enough trees to go around, they also couldn't build their boats from which they used to fish. And so slowly they began to die of famine, effectively, and the population began to decline really dramatically. So, and to me, what's really powerful about this story is that it shows us collapse in rapid motion. That's all due to effectively a myth. Okay? But it was a myth that was so powerful that despite knowing its madness, the people couldn't resist it. Now, it might be easy for us to assume that this is maybe a characteristic of sort of small-scale societies, but in fact, that's not at all true. In our own globalized civilization, we too are subject to very powerful myths. And one of those myths is very similar to the myth that led to the demise of Easter Island. So in the same way that Easter Island economics was organized around the principle of ever-increasing stone heads, okay? So too our society is organized around the principle of ever-increasing GDP growth. So now, basically, the principle is that GDP must grow and must grow at all costs. So think about it, right? So right now, GDP growth is a primary public policy objective of literally every government, almost every government, on the face of the planet. Think about that. And it's held by left and right alike, okay? So, the left and the right may bicker about how to distribute the yields of growth through better wages or public housing, whatever it might be. But on the question of growth itself, they are unanimously united. So think about the Labour Party up until now, a robust, at least ostensibly robust leftist party has historically been very pro-growth. And so on this issue, there's no daylight between them and the Tories. Okay? This is how hegemonic the idea of growth is in our society. So why must GDP grow? The assumption that we all have is that GDP growth is effectively equivalent to human progress. This is basically what we're told from virtually every media outlet that there is, in terms of World Bank reports, IMF reports, the world's nations ranked by GDP every year, every quarter even, and so on. The idea is that we need growth in order to do important things that we all love, like eradicate poverty and improve people's well-being, create jobs and maybe even increase wages. We think that growth is essential to these things. So we take the assumption of necessary growth for granted. It seems to us to be normal and natural, and if you ever do stop and question it, then people look at you like you're completely mad. And if you don't believe me, literally try it and see what your reaction is. It's quite curious. It's one of those sort of deeply unquestioned assumptions about our world. So what is GDP? GDP is, in sort of very lay terms, it's the measure of all the stuff that we extract and produce and consume in our economy every year, the monetary measure of all that stuff. So another way to put it is that it measures the monetary value of all the resources that we dig up from the earth, right, and the human labor that we churn into money. So to the extent that we churn nature and humans into money, that is GDP growth, right? And what's important here is that the principle of growth is that every year we must extract and produce and consume more than we did the year before. It's a flow measure. It's not a stock measure. And so to grow the economy, we have to, next year, we've got to produce and consume as much as we are this year, plus in increments. Okay. Now, what's interesting about this is that this is a relatively recent invention, actually. It was actually, the idea of GDP was devised only recently by Simon Kuznets, an American economist, who was asked by Congress in the 1930s to figure out why the Great Depression was going on and how it could be fixed. So he came up with a measure that basically added up all of the value in the economy every year, so they could figure out where the problem was and what they could do to sort of sort it out. And of course, the American Congress adopted it. But in his speech to Congress, Kuznets himself gave a warning. And he said, whatever you do, never use GDP as a measure of normal human progress. It will be the end of you, is what he said. And the reason is because GDP is an odd measure, and he designed it so he should know. It's a measure that doesn't count social negatives or ecological negatives. So for example, if you cut down a forest and sell the forest for timber, GDP goes up. But it doesn't account for the cost of losing that forest as a sink for carbon, or as a habitat for endangered species, or as a future asset, right? And the same goes with, say, mountains. If you strip the mountains for coal, then GDP goes up. It doesn't count the cost of the emissions from the coal, et cetera, okay? So he warned against it, but then something happened, unfortunately, and that was that World War II became a thing, and there were Nazis all around, and the government of Britain wanted to figure out how they could defeat the Nazis at all costs. And so John Maynard Keynes, famous British economist, rocked up on stage, and he said, well, we can use GDP as a way of figuring out all the resources we have available to fight the war effort. And Cousins was like, wait, don't do this, it's going to be dangerous, for my warning. And he was like, no, we have to beat the Nazis at all costs. So even though the GDP includes things that are bad, we need to know how much monetary power we have. So let's do that. And so it further entrenched the idea. And then, most importantly, during the Cold War, in the sort of epic battle between the West and the USSR, GDP, but not just GDP growth itself became an indicator for measuring which civilization was best. So kind of grand pissing match, if you will, between the big men in the sort of world stage. And ever since then, because of the way that globalization has worked, this measure has been spread around the world and now is the dominant feature of literally every economic system on the planet in a formal sense. And it's no wonder that it's so violent. If you think about it, GDP was devised as a wartime measure, right? The idea was a violent intention in the first place, and so it's not surprising that it doesn't pay attention to the consequences of violence. Now let's think about what growth means. Okay? I said that you have to have an increment every year to keep the economy afloat. Economists say we need about 3% per year. So 3% maybe sounds sort of small to us, actually. And it sounds normal for sure. I mean, we hear this from our politicians almost every time they open their mouths. This is the kind of growth that we need. It's enshrined in the Sustainable Development Goals, bizarrely. Okay. It seems easy, it seems fine, because we're used to thinking in a linear scale. But growth is an exponential curve. It's a compound function. So 3% growth means doubling a thing every 20 years. So think about that. If you take the global economy in the year 2000, which was not a time of poverty, let's say, right? I mean, right? This is a time of already rampant consumerism in the West. And then imagine doubling that global economy by the year 2020. And then doubling it again from its already doubled state by the year 2040. And then doubling it again and so on and so forth, right? Until the end of the century when the global economy is 32 times larger than it is at the beginning of the century. That is the trajectory that not only we are presently on, but trying to advance, right? This is our objective, which is almost, it boggles the mind, actually. If ancient Egypt, at the beginning of their civilization, of their 3,000-year civilization, had 1 cubic meter of stuff, and grew that amount of stuff by a modest 3% every year, by the end of their civilization, they would have enough stuff to fill 1 billion solar systems, which is in fact not a joke. This gives you a sense of sort of the absurd scale effect of growth. Okay? Now, here's the thing, is that as GDP rises on an exponential curve, then ecological impact rises right along with it. And for some of you, this may seem like common sense. Okay? But I'm going to give you a measure, and it's a measure that we in ecological economics call material footprint. And it's a single measure that measures all of the material stuff that we extract and consume from the earth every year. So everything from petroleum to plastic, from biomass and forests to fish, gold and silver and stone, everything that we consume. If you add all of that stuff up, then right now we're consuming 80 billion tons of stuff per year. For perspective, the sustainable level of material consumption, they say, ecologists say, is about 50 billion tons of stuff per year. We passed that in the year 2000, and we're now overshooting that boundary by 60% per year. According to the models that we have right now, with business as usual, on our present trajectory, we're going to hit 180 billion tons of stuff per year, more than double what we're presently consuming, and 3 times more than the planetary boundary. Okay? And again, this is the objective. This is where we're headed. So we're living in an age of what we call ecological overshooting. And if you're not familiar with that term, the best way to understand it is that it means that we're extracting and wasting more than the Earth can regenerate or absorb. So if we were extracting only as much as the Earth could regenerate, because the Earth is a regenerative place, and if we were wasting and emitting carbon only to the extent that the atmosphere could reabsorb it safely, and our oceans could reabsorb it safely, we would be at what we call a steady state economy. Okay? But instead of being at a steady state, we're in a phase of ecological overshooting. And we can see the consequences all around us. And I'm sure that if you read the news, you're familiar with them. Okay? We know that since 1950, half of the world's tropical forests have disappeared. And believe it or not, on our present trajectory, they will be gone by the year 2050, which is incredibly soon. Our grandchildren may not see a mature tropical forest. Fish stocks are collapsing really rapidly. Many of our key fish stocks are down to 1% of their former volume from earlier in the 20th century. Insect populations are collapsing. This is a huge story right now with key insect populations across Western Europe down by 75% over only 25 years, due largely to the chemicals that we use in industrial agriculture. The broad biodiversity extinction rate right now, species are going extinct at more than 1,000 times faster than the background rate before the industrial revolution, which some ecologists think is actually more serious than climate change because it's an existential threat to our civilization. And then, of course, there's climate change itself, which I'm sure everyone is aware of. Right now, even with the Paris Agreement in place and the nationally determined contributions that nations have promised, we're headed on a trajectory of 3 degrees warming by the end of the century, which may not sound like very much. And of course, this will mean rising seas. But more importantly, the bigger issue for us is the prospect of famine. Because as the planet warms, then agricultural yields begin to decline. And if we're trying to feed a growing human population with declining agricultural yields, this is going to result in, even according to the most conservative estimates by organizations like the World Bank, mass famine in this century, which will drive only further human displacement and wipe out any gains, crucially, that we hope to make against poverty through the dominance paradigm of growth. Okay. Now, what's important about this is that, in terms of responsibility for this crisis, the hard truth is that virtually all of it is due to overconsumption in a handful of rich nations, like the UK, the US, nations in Western Europe, Australia, and so on. Okay. Right now, in the average high-income nation, the average person consumes 28 material tons of stuff per year. Okay. In low-income nations of the world, the average is about 2 tons of stuff per year. So in rich nations, people consume about 14 times more material stuff in that broad category that I discussed before than people do in low-income nations. Okay. If we were to all consume at the level of the average person in the rest of the world, including middle-income nations, then we would be consuming 7 tons of stuff per year, which is exactly at the planetary boundary. Okay. So if we were consuming like everyone else in the rest of the world, there would be no ecological overshoot. In terms of emissions, maybe, but in terms of other kinds of ecological overshoot, no. So this again emphasizes the fact that this is down to overconsumption in a few rich nations, who have been on a growth trajectory for a very long time and very aggressively. So if the entire world were to consume as we do in high-income nations, we would need 3.8 Earths to sustain our consumption. Which is interesting, because the plan right now is that everyone should be like the West. Everyone should be like high-income nations. This is the development objective. And of course, we don't have the Earths necessary for this, unless, of course, Elon Musk manages to colonize Mars and somehow turn it into Earth, and then do that 3 or 4 times more. And of course, what's important about this also is that this overconsumption has a disproportionate impact on the global South. So here's one example. The global South suffers losses due to climate change in the region of $600 billion per year, which outstrips the aid budget by a factor of 5. So for every dollar of aid that the North gives to the South, they lose 5 times more than that, simply in costs associated with climate change, due to historical emissions, almost entirely by rich nations. And this is sort of the depth of climate injustice. Each year, about 400,000 people die due to climate change-related causes. 98% of those people die in the global South every year. And the vast majority of them are from countries that have contributed the very least to historical emissions of anyone on Earth. So the conclusion here is that rich nations need to make dramatic reductions in their consumption. Okay? In the region of 75% reductions in material consumption each year, and emissions reductions of 12% per year starting in 2050. This is our only roadmap to sort of living within planetary boundaries. But here's the question. Is it possible to achieve these kinds of reductions in the context of a growing economy? This is literally the $1 million billion question, right? Because remember, our objective is growth. And so how too can our objective also be this massive reduction in consumption, right? Now, in 2012, a number of key reports came out saying, don't worry everybody, all we need is green growth, right? So we can figure out ways to use public policy and technological innovation to decouple material consumption, ecological degradation from growth. So we can keep growing our incomes indefinitely, while at the same time reducing our material consumption and our emissions back down to planetary boundaries. Okay. This was their promise to us in 2012, not long ago. Of course, at the time, there was no data that this was in fact possible. But since then, fortunately, we do have data. A number of very high-profile models that have been released that explore precisely this question. And the news, time after time after time, is bad. In fact, literally every scientific study that's been published on this concludes the same thing, and that is that absolute decoupling of resource use from GDP is impossible. Including the UN, only a couple of months ago, that came to this very strong conclusion that green growth is not a thing. So, of course, we're going to need all the technology we can get, all the best public policy we can get, but also it's not going to be enough. If growth is incompatible with planetary boundaries, and if then the conclusion, of course, is that some kind of degrowth is necessary, some kind of reduction in our economic activity, right? And this is a difficult pill to swallow, and almost nobody is talking about this fact that we need to sort of plan a scale down of our aggregate economic activity in order to maintain the basis for our own civilization. Right. Now, here's the thing: is that crucially, whenever I say this, someone's always going out there saying, "You're talking about voluntary poverty, hair shirts, misery, hunger, what, no one's going to buy into this agenda." But here's the thing. Degrowth does not mean immiseration. Okay? And we know that for these reasons. In the 1970s, the United States of America had a lower poverty rate and higher real wages than it does today, despite a GDP per capita half of what it is presently. They were half as rich in aggregate, and yet they were doing better in key human indicators. Can anyone guess why that was? Yeah. What's that? Okay, yeah, definitely. Distribution, exactly. It was a more equally, a more equitable distribution of the yields of the economy already, right? Here's another example. Europe, right, has 40% less GDP per capita than the US. And yet they beat the US on virtually every measure of what counts. Education, healthcare, life expectancy, happiness, right? Espresso, plazas, etc., right? Costa Rica. Costa Rica has better life expectancy than the US and higher happiness levels than the US, rivaling even Scandinavian nations, with 1/5 of the GDP per capita, because they've invested heavily in universal healthcare and education. It's easy to generate high levels of human happiness and well-being without any growth at all, simply by redistributing more fairly what we already have. So this is crucial, because growth, in fact, this idea that growth is necessary for us to live good lives is in fact a lie. We know from data after data after data that that's not true. So the question is, how do we get there? How do we manage a kind of economy where we're scaling down our economic activity and at the same time maintaining and even enhancing human flourishing? So I'm going to appeal to your intellect and offer you a couple of ideas that we discuss in some ecological economic circles. Now remember, the goal here is not simply to get individuals to reduce their material consumption. As noble as that is, it's a dead end. And the reason is because we all live in a society, in an economy, that is structurally dependent on growth. If it does not grow, it collapses. And if it collapses, then people get hurt and they die. Right? People lose their jobs, they can't pay for food on the table, they end up homeless, etc. Nobody wants this. So we need to liberate ourselves somehow, not just from our own individual consumption, but from the tyranny of growth that lies at the heart of our economy. Okay. How do we get there? We have to think first, intellectually, about why our economy has to grow in the first place. Once we understand why it must grow, we can think about how to change those features of it. So here's one idea. What if we got rid of GDP as an objective, as a public policy objective? Remember, I told you about the problems with it. There are alternative measures out there. One is called the genuine progress indicator, which starts with GDP and then subtracts social and ecological negatives. Okay? So when politicians are pursuing GPI, for example, then they're incentivized to maximize social goods while minimizing ecological bads. Okay? So when you change the thing that we're chasing, you change the behavior of our politicians. A second idea is to do something about the shareholder value rules that corporations operate under. So if you take your average local pub, what is their objective? Their objective is to make enough money every year, probably the same amount of money each year, so that they can pay their rents, pay their workers, and buy some food for their family. Okay, that is their objective. Not to take over every pub in the world, but literally that is the objective, this idea of endless growth, of every listed company on the stock market. And the reason is because they have a fiduciary duty to, by law, to maximize shareholder returns, regardless of the ecological and social cost of it. But it's very simple to change these laws. A few sentences would do the trick. And so we have people working on this already, and we should get involved in that. We've already discussed the importance of a fair distribution of the yields of our economy. And the reason this is important is because politicians tell us that we need growth to improve people's lives, and they literally often say themselves that growth is a substitute for equality. Okay? You will literally hear politicians saying this, and economists, because it's easier for them to grow the pie and hope that some trickles down than to redistribute what we already have more fairly. Okay? But we can take their little maxim and turn it around. If growth is a substitute for equality, then equality can be a substitute for growth, and we need to insist on that. It used to be that demanding greater equality was kind of this radical left-wing agenda. But in fact, today, it's necessary for our survival on this planet, right? This is no longer about ideology. So in a way, we're all revolutionaries now, or we have to be. Here's another idea. Decommoditizing basic social goods. Okay. Take the US, for example. In America, people spend immense amounts of their money on private health care, because there's no NHS. And on private education, because there's, here too, but there's enormous fees for higher education. If those goods were decommoditized, then they would be able to spend a lot less money for the exact same quality of life, allowing them to work less, earn less, and consume less without any losses to their well-being. Or take London. If the housing stock in London was even half decommoditized, if our rent was half as much, we could work half as much, roughly, and earn half as much, and yet have no loss to our quality of life. Think about that. Right? This is the kind of thing we need to be thinking about as we move towards a kind of post-growth economy. I'm going to give you another idea, and that is a shorter working week. This is important because of what we call the productivity trap. Inbuilt in capitalism is the imperative for corporations to always increase labor productivity. Okay? As they do so, then they need fewer workers, and so it increases unemployment. And so politicians have to generate more growth to create more jobs to reabsorb those unemployed people. Okay? If we had a shorter working week and something like a job guarantee, we could redistribute necessary labor so all of us have access to the incomes we need to survive without having to generate more growth to create more jobs and reabsorb unemployed people. Okay? Working less is crucial to saving the planet. Bizarrely, tell your boss that. But here's the last idea I have for you. And I'm sure that Helen will talk more about this. And that is that one of the reasons our economy has to grow is because of debt. Our economy is shot through with debt. And because debt comes with interest, and interest is a compound function, all of us have to work and produce more and more every year simply to pay back our debts, and so that we can keep sort of stability. So if we had something like citizens' debt audits, deciding which debts don't need to be repaid anymore because people are rich enough already, which has been done in some cities, in some localities, then we could rid a lot of the debt out of our economy. But it wouldn't actually be enough because our currency itself is based on debt. And this is a crucial thing that most people don't understand. When you go to a bank and take out a loan, you think that the bank is giving you money for its vault, its reserves. But in fact, it's not. When you get a loan, a bank gives you a loan and it invents that money out of thin air. Literally out of thin air. And so as it creates money, as it gives you a loan, it creates new money. And that money is intrinsically debt. 97% of the money floating around in our economy right now is debt in this manner. So, which is one reason why we have this structural addiction to debt. So, with alternative currency systems that are debt-free, public money or positive money, it will remove, we hope, some of this sort of growth imperative from our economy. I'm going to stop, but I want to say I want to say one last thing, and that is that I really think that we have to be careful to not fool ourselves. It's easy for us to talk about moving towards a post-growth economy without confronting the obvious elephant in the room. And that is that.
That's enough of that.
Can you hear me?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Okay. I was just making sure.
All right. Yeah. All right. So, welcome to Subversive History, an anti-capitalist and anti-colonial Twitch stream where we cover books that you're probably not going to read, but hopefully you do, and we're hoping that we inspire you to read them along with us.
Even if you don't, if you watch and you learn like a couple things about the topic of the book, that's all good.
Yeah, we're hoping that it's just that it's like a chill weekend vacation sort of deal, and not that everyone that follows our stream got into huge fights with their family because of things that they learned on our Twitch stream, and therefore are I just need to take a step back and just get off of this thing, and need to stop letting this bad influence in my life. How you doing, Sam? Good to see you.
What's up, Sam? So happy.
Pat reads, so we don't have to. This is true. Pat has read all the books. I'm right there along with you, chat. Especially if you're watching this later, I'm literally reading this sometimes up to half an hour before we go live.
This is my second time through The Divide. So I read this one a few years ago on a plane to LA. So in about a 3-hour time period, I read the majority of this book in one sitting. And it's very rare, actually, even though I consider myself somewhat of an avid reader, I have a hard time reading for long periods at a time. Usually I can only read 10 or 20 pages, and then I would have to, oh man, I got switched up. I don't even know how this actually happened. The producer isn't here today. It's just me and Johnny working the control boards. Can we switch it back for the sake of consistency?
I let me see if I can figure out how to do that. No. Is there a way?
How about this? How about we do it like this? How about we do it like this from now on?
There you go. Yeah, I have. I'm sorry, Sam. We have no idea what we're doing. I feel like the fact that we're both literate enough to like read all these books, shouldn't that be good enough?
But astute observation. It's endearing that someone even watches this consistently enough to even notice that. So, thank you so much. Thanks. I'll just have to come to grips with this new reality I've been forced to exist in.
I'm gonna be honest with you. I never even noticed that like the both of us were always on like one side or the other.
I didn't even notice either. But
So
yeah. So we are coming to like the conclusion of The Divide, which has been really fun to cover for the past couple weeks. Kind of looking forward for it to be over and us embark on a new topic and a new book. Should we debut what is coming, or should we?
Yeah, I mean, I don't see why not. We've got what, like 2 more chapters? 3
chapters. So by next weekend we'll be concluding this book if we stay at the rate that we've been at.
True. Okay. So like, you know, we flipped a coin because well, you know, it's like picking a favorite child. It's difficult, you know, and especially when it's like 2 different authors that we are both like not only just like so heavily influenced by, but just like so.
We don't, not this time. We've already done it this time, but I mean, maybe in future dilemmas, we could do a poll to see which like of a couple choices, what the audience would be more willing to hear.
Yeah, not to, you know, put too like we don't want to put that kind of pressure on Sam as like, you know, our most valued chatter right now to be like, all right, you decide what the next book is. But it was pretty much like a toss up between Gerald Horne and the, what is it called again? The Counter Revolution of 1776. It was between that and Liberalism by Domenico Lacerdo. And we flipped a coin and we went with Gerald Horne. And I'm thinking that like this might be like after, or at least towards like the end of the book, we might even want to invite Gerald Horne on to like, you know, speak with us about like a top, you know.
Is Domenico Lacerda still alive?
No, he died. He passed away of, I think, like a brain tumor or cancer or something.
Disease.
He's bad. He was really quick too.
A fatal case of Based syndrome.
Yeah. Sadly, he passed away because I think that like when he did pass away, he was at like the fucking top of his game. You know what I mean? So it's kind of a shame that like he passed away when he did. But yeah. So today we're talking about chapter 6 titled Free Trade and the Rise of the Virtual Senate, which I believe is the term that he borrowed from Noam Chomsky.
The virtual Senate part.
What's that?
The virtual Senate part?
Yeah, the virtual Senate part.
I didn't realize that.
Yeah, I think he mentions it in the book, but you know, it's easy to gloss over. This chapter is kind of doesn't bite quite as hard as like the other ones do. That's not to say that like the information in it isn't like, you know, necessary. I think it's very necessary if you're going to try and at least understand like, you know, a lot of what influences a lot of like modern day like financial decisions. Gerald Horne is always a good pick. I posted a video of him in Discord. Yes, you did. And I think
Excited
that
for that one too, because I actually haven't read his work yet. I own a copy of The Counter Revolution of 1776, and it's gotten lost in the shuffle of my bookshelf. But being able to read it alongside Johnny and bounce ideas back and forth, and as well as share it with everyone in chat and do like a more formal dissection of the book is very exciting. I'm very happy to be first experiencing that book in this context. Do I have an at in Discord?
you're not even in your own Discord server, dude. I've invited you. I don't even think you're in it. You're not.
I'm
All right, Sam. I'll get him. I'll get him in there. You gotta understand, Sam, that like Pat is also working like full time, just like me. But he's also got like school going on at the same time, you know. And in between all of this, like he still has like, you know, a relationship, everything else to balance out, you know, and other interests outside of streaming, you know.
For me, prior to starting this stream, I was not a regular user of Twitch or Discord or Twitter or any of these things. Like, pretty much had like a recreational relationship with Facebook for like friends and things like that. But I don't even have an Instagram. So I'm not necessarily as online as. So I mean, I'm very happy to be in the Discord. I'm very happy to be on Twitch. All these enterprises are very new and exciting to me. I'm happy to be a part of it. But I didn't realize that I wasn't in the Discord. I wasn't actually sure how that happened. So in due time, I will be in the Discord. We'll probably have that discussion after the stream today. We'll make sure that I actually get in there so that you can at me for whatever reason you need. So stay tuned. I'll be in the Discord.
You know, I'm the out of the duo or trio that we are. I am like terminally online. Actually yes, Pat is actually touching grass and the mat. You know, because that's another thing. We are going to be reaching out to somebody to start designing, you know, badges, you know, along with like a custom background and a bunch of other stuff. Hopefully we'll have that within the coming year. But our badges are going to be influenced by Gracie Gym Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu belts. So look out for that. It's going to be fun.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you're going to be able to use, you know, what like the dialectical materialist ranking belt system of jiu-jitsu to like, you know, I don't know where the hell I'm going with this.
Submit your political adversaries.
Yeah, there you go. Submit, you know, liberal and reactionary politics with dialectical materialism and as an art form. But yeah, so the chapter opens up with Nelson Mandela quote: "Only free men can negotiate. Prisoners cannot enter into contracts." And I feel like, what's up, Pat?
Let's talk. Like, I did want to kind of just start right there at that. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it opens and it kind of sets like a thematic tone with that quote. And there's, you know, so much, you know, from our spiritual advisor, Nelson Mandela, you know, so much goes into just that brief line that I think is so important to like the economic dynamics of the world, and especially of capitalism, because you know there's a very frequent misconception of capitalism that everything in it is just completely voluntary, that it's like, you know, proponents and apologists of capitalism and its associated ideologies frequently call upon this voluntary nature of it, you know, and proponents of liberalism as well, liberalism, capitalism, etc., that it is virtuous because it is voluntary, and these relations of production and relations of exchange that we all participate in are purely voluntary, and at any point you can choose to not participate in them, and thus that makes it virtuous and more moral than other maybe centrally planned or otherwise collective means of organization and production. And I think that this quote from our spiritual advisor Nelson Mandela is a very salient deconstruction of that misconception.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like, that's why, like, for the Twitter announcement that we're going to be going live, you know, I was talking about, like, come tell us, like, you know, what you think the difference is between coercion and liberty, because you can talk about liberty, you can talk about how you have, like, you know, this ability to, like, oh, if you don't like the wage that you're getting from your job, you know, you can always get a job somewhere else. If you don't like where you live, you can always, like, just get up and move somewhere else. But all of this is always dependent upon the amount of money that you have, the amount of capital that you have, you know, what skill you have that you can trade for a wage. And, like, you know, it's coercion. You're forced to operate within this system, right? This capitalist neoliberal hell, right? Or be homeless, or, you know, starve to death, or, you know, not be able to afford medical care, or any of these other things. And, like, you know, I think that what this book has done an excellent job of illustrating so far is that it's not just within the borders of your country, the borders within, like, your nation. It's an international form of coercion, you know. And I think that, like, you know, as we get further along in this chapter, you'll see why it's not just you know, here in America. It's not just Canada. It's not just the global north, the global south. No matter what system they choose, right? No matter what kind of economy they would like to choose to have by either democratic means or even undemocratic means, they are still forced to operate within a system that benefits the global north.
That what you stated there, that what we're looking at now is something that transcends national identity. And there's a really amazing quote by one of our spiritual advisors, Kwame Nkrumah, when he was advocating to other African nations in a Pan-Africanist urging. And he said that the corporations which subjugate us respect no borders. These are multinational corporations. Thus, we must be multinational. We cannot be balkanized into these individual nations that can be pitted against one another and exploited individually. Why do we need to be? I don't know how that started. I said it one day, and now I just refer to any of, like, the, not everyone, but, like, certain individuals that, like, are just, like, key influences in us. I just refer to them as our spiritual advisors. But Kwame Nkrumah made this urging to the nations of Africa that why should we be punished for collectivizing or establishing international cooperation when we are fighting and pitted against a multinational corporate system that is in itself collective in the sense that it spans across multiple nations?
So he opens up talking about, like, you know, what is the origin of this phrase free trade. You know, and he talks about how America's trade tariffs were decided by London and fixed at a low rate as to allow British exporters the right to sell their goods on the American market with ease. The British called this free trade and pursued it with an almost religious zeal. But there was a double standard at play. The British were imposing low tariffs on America and their colonies while knowing full well that their own industrial development had depended on exactly the opposite. Ever since the 14th century, and particularly during the 18th century, Britain had aggressively protected its own markets with high tariffs, excluding foreign competitors in order to build up its own industries. So, like the book has stated in numerous times so far, that these, like, this protective economy, these protectionist, you know, things that these governments enact, right, help build up their economy. And that the U.S. was at one point subject to, like, the protectionist economy of London.
And this is something, like, you know what I mean? Like, the deeper that we go into this book and other writings that are critical of the American project, you learn more and more of the hypocritical nature of the American economic identity, let's refer to it as.
Right.
Whereas this situation right here that you're describing, the low tariffs imposed by Britain, is a key catalyst for the American Revolution. Americans felt, or what would become America, the colonies felt as though that they were being economically disadvantaged by forcible tariffs, and that they needed to overthrow this mother country that was subjugating them in these economic situations that they would prefer not to have. So it's almost as if this very coercive mechanism that was opposed as a part of the American identity, the independence of America, was contingent upon that Britain, you will not set these undesirable tariffs upon us. That is the very thing that they are imposing on the other countries of the world, which they have an unequal exchange.
Right.
Dynamic.
And then it's also comical almost, or I guess ironic that America would take part in that colonialism and imperialism later on, because Britain, after losing America, that is basically the cause for the opium wars in China, right? And the expansion of their markets, or rather like
they needed to turn. So you're saying they needed to turn elsewhere for their economic viability. All those ghost acres and everything that we discussed a couple chapters ago, they could no longer glean that from the Americas anymore. So now they need to turn the screws harder on places like India and China and I know that South Africa, I would assume.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. So that was one of my favorite parts when I read this, was just you take something that was that America looked at as anti-colonial, we don't want to be a colony and we don't want forcible trade situations, low tariffs imposed upon us. And then that became almost the very identity of the United States.
Right.
So you probably have all these people that are simultaneously libertarians, free marketeers, but also constitutionalists. You know what I mean? They embody, or at least they believe that they embody, with no real educational process, the virtues of the founding fathers, when in reality they extol the very virtues of the British, the crown at the time.
Pretty much. And that's I think another good reason why we're going to go over Gerald Horne's book next, is that the reality is that it wasn't for the benefit of those suffering masses, those poor, toiling, lowest of the low, working in this British colony. It was because the rich white landowning men wanted their treats for cheap.
Mm-hmm.
They wanted their tea for cheap, and and everything after that, was set up so that everything would be easy on them for the next 300 years.
Yeah. So now getting into the, with that little preface that was provided for this concept of free trade as it existed from a historic precedent, now we come into this more modern conceptualization that is formalized through the World Trade Organization. If you were here with us last week and the week before that, you learned, as we went through the very specific mechanisms by which the World Bank and the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, drive Western interests and either incidentally or intentionally immiserate the global South into deeper and deeper poverty, and thus foster a greater dependence on Western nations. So now we're going to take that scenario and make it a little bit more broad into these institutional ways by which the Western European imperial core countries further drive this let's call it a favorable business climate upon global South countries and the way that they can extract more and more unequal exchange value from them. Johnny, I just saw a message there. Is this a video you want me to put up at this point?
Yeah. So like one of the primary tools by how like they enact this general agreement on tariffs and trade is just that, this system designed by Keynes, through which like the Keynesian economy is how America was able to build itself up, especially after the Great Depression and during World War II, right, is with this thing called GATT, General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade. And the excess protectionism was a primary driver of the Great Depression, a depression that had caused such misery in Germany and Japan, for example, that it had eventually given rise to the fascist politics that led to war, along with some other things. The result of GATT was to reduce tariffs across the board through collective bargaining among industrialized countries. GATT members met in the Uruguayan city. Oh, you know what? I'm sure this thing will explain it.
Hit it.
Have you ever played Monopoly or Settlers of Catan and no one wants to trade with you? Any fights because of these games? The same thing kind of happened during the 1920s and 1930s. Protectionist policies, while not the sole reason, did contribute to the explosion of World War II. So in order to avoid any future wars, the Allies created a few institutions to help sustain a new world order. You got the UN, IMF, and World Bank, founded in 1944 and 1945. In addition to the UN, which theoretically allows peace talks on world issues, and the Bretton Woods institutions, which are supposed to deliver economic stability, countries were interested in lowering barriers of international trade. No one wanted to slap that extra wheat on the brick or that extra $100 on a Reading Railroad. A group of 23 countries signed the General Agreement on Trade and Tariffs in October 1947, which was going to affect at least a fifth of the world's trade. There was an ambitious plan called the International Trade Organization in negotiation, but the United States Congress shot down the idea. After the United States officially denied ratification of the ITO, GATT officially became the only multilateral organization to facilitate global trade. Initially, GATT's sole purpose was to lower tariffs between countries, but as time passed on, other pressing issues such as anti-dumping and agricultural goods became hot topics. GATT has several updates, and the Uruguay round is when GATT evolves into the WTO that we know today. The Uruguay round, which started from 1896 and ended in 1994, was a multilateral negotiation that took longer than expected. With evolving economies, it made sense that the organization dealt with services and intellectual property, things that GATT lacked. Lengthy negotiation also provided countries the opportunity to review the original articles, and with all these things piling up, countries decided to adopt the Uruguay round decisions, thus establishing the WTO. By the time the WTO was established, there were 125 countries that were part of GATT. This group of countries also represented roughly 90% of global trade. When comparing GATT and WTO, it can be best claimed that the WTO equals GATT plus new rules. For example, the WTO now deals with trades and services and handles intellectual property. It's like having a pre-made team with 3 members in one squad called the WTO. The objective of GATT and WTO are pretty much the same. Both organizations share the commitment to lower tariffs and eliminate trade barriers and unfair trade. Through the WTO, countries desire that both big and small countries can grow and commit to halting unfair treatment. You can imitate this attitude by liking, subscribing, and commenting on this video as a nod towards efforts of small YouTubers trying to navigate through this YouTube algorithm. The agreement system is a bit different. For GATT, agreements were multilateral and plurilateral, which means that countries can voluntarily agree to some agreements. In the WTO, all agreements are multilateral and binding. Another major difference between the two organizations is the strength of the dispute system. Both GATT and WTO have a system to intervene between countries that may disagree on certain trade problems. During the GATT years, all parties related to the trade dispute had to agree to the proposal in order to resolve a trade dispute. Yes, and by all, I'm also talking about the party that technically lost in this dispute. Without that country's consent, nothing can be solved. The WTO website claims that there weren't as many rulings that were rejected. This is partly because countries were afraid that other countries could deny rulings against them if a future trade dispute were to happen. However, this significantly weakens any negotiation related to trade disputes. Unlike GATT, the WTO created an independent body that looks into any trade disputes. If any party disagrees with the results, just like a regular jury, the appellate body will re-investigate and then make a ruling that is binding. If countries refuse to adhere to the result, the WTO allows unilateral action against the aggressor, which is usually terrorists not restricted by any rules. Because retaliation is allowed, the WTO is faster at handling disputes that are submitted by countries. Another similarity between GATT and WTO is a policy that allows countries to identify their own economic status. If a country is doing well, they can identify as developed. If a country is struggling, they can identify as developing. These labels have raised controversy among developed countries. For example, China, the second largest economy in the world, identifies themselves as a developing country. While China could probably defend this status by pointing out to the GDP per capita ranking, countries like the United States are not happy with these labels. You see, countries that have a developing country status are exempted from certain rules that bind developed countries, such as protection from other countries in certain industries. This means that developing countries can continue unfair trade in order to catch up with the wealthier countries. Because the current WTO policy allows countries to self-report, and the WTO lacks the criteria on what is developing, this has been a source of debate for the past few years. All in all, both GATT and WTO wants to make sure fair trade is happening around the globe and that people are receiving the love they deserve. The WTO is in no way perfect, and there are problems that continue to plague this organization. Keep an eye out on how big countries continue to interact with the WTO, which is the only global.
Yeah, there's only some problems, just a couple, just a few. But also, I kind of love the fact that China just kind of gamed the system and was like, "Yeah, no, we're still developing.
We're still figuring it out. Oh, look at that!
Look at that! How the hell did we do that?"
It was a little miracle there from some ephemeral being.
Some ethereal being managed to switch us around there.
So, a portion of the book that I picked out to kind of describe this chapter that I felt like was a good example of just kind of the overall point that was being made by Hickel is that while accession to the WTO was technically optional, developing countries didn't really have much of a choice. After 15 years of structural adjustment, if you watched our last stream, we go into excruciating detail regarding structural adjustment. So after 15 years of structural adjustment, their economies had been reorganized towards exports. They now depended on access to Western markets for their survival. Joining the WTO would facilitate such access, but in return, they would have to reduce their tariffs, stop subsidizing their own industries, deregulate capital flows, and allow foreign corporations to operate domestically without prejudice. In other words, exactly the opposite of what they knew they needed for meaningful industrial development. Whereas structural adjustment imposed free market policies on developing countries one by one, the WTO extended and standardized the neoliberal system across the global south in one fell swoop. Most countries had no choice but to comply. So this brings us back to that opening line by Nelson Mandela that a prisoner cannot adequately engage in negotiations. They will always be beyond the 8 ball. They will always be under some degree of coercion, much like in this situation, where developing countries are absolutely export geared and dependent upon the Western markets, which are going to procure the products that they're producing, products or resources, and thus to not agree to engage in this World Trade Organization agreement would essentially cripple their economy. Now, obviously, there's certain countries that have developed more of an internally stabilized economy that have kind of fallen out of the global system, but those are outliers.
All right. For the most part, it's going to be countries that are scrutinized under theories that a lot of the times are at face value. They're commonplace with a lot of economists, like the Ricardo, theories around economies being just naturally, in air quotes, naturally, just like some countries are good for labor and other countries are just good for inventing stuff and being at the helm of the world economy, which leads to theories like the Heckscher Olin Samuelson theory, right? Which has this like weird thing about like relative endowments of technology to relative endowments of factors of production. It argues that in order to achieve maximum efficiency in the global economy, countries that have an abundance of cheap labor should specialize in labor intensive goods, while countries that have an abundance of capital should specialize in capital intensive goods. Which, what the fuck? How does
I love that concept of capital being like having some kind of like a natural occurrence or something like that. Like there is no process of primitive accumulation whatsoever that caused you to have an abundance of capital. So like, you know what I mean? Like obviously maybe if you waltz into the economic system in the year 2000 and you're like, well, some countries have capital and some don't. So you're the capital countries and you can be the resource countries. It seems really simple to me.
It's just the way things are.
But there are many individuals who have criticized this far before the year 2000. I think we may have a quote of one relatively important economist that may have made a pretty salient criticism of this type of thinking. Johnny, did you have anything pulled up regarding that?
Yeah, no, he's this I don't know if you've ever heard of him, but like, you know, he's this like German economist, right? And his quote goes, we are told that free trade would create an international division of labor and thereby give to each country the production which is in most harmony with its natural advantage. You believe, perhaps, gentlemen, that the production of coffee and sugar is the natural destiny of the West Indies. 2 centuries ago, nature, which does not trouble herself about commerce, had planted neither sugarcane nor coffee trees there. You know, and this guy argues that capital and labor are a product of historical and political processes. They are man-made. That you know, what the hell is his name? It's poor countries, on the other hand, have cheap labor and no capital because of a long history of colonization, dispossession, unequal treaties, and structural adjustment. Right. Oh no, his name is Karl Marx.
That might be one of like that might be one of the first Marx quotes that we've actually read on here, which is interesting.
That is the first Mark. Thus far, we have gone like literally every stream without actually quoting Marx.
And they call us dogmatic.
Right.
They call us dogmatic. Like, you know what I mean? Like as if like it's adhered to some like religious degree.
Right.
Moral Marx. Exactly.
Yes. Marl Karx. That guy. Like
Carlson Martin.
Like the wildest thing is that we are like practically almost done with the book, right? And not once has like, you know, he quoted Marx or anything, or even like, you know, far left people. Most of like, you know, the statistics that we've read are actually fairly conservative. So whatever statistics we've read, they're probably actually worse than that.
Yeah. The devil's actually in the details of many of these. Many of these sources are actually like large governmental institutions. Like even many of these statistics that we're reading are actually statistics provided by the World Bank itself and by the International Monetary Fund. This isn't like, you know, and this is something that I bring up very consistently here, is that we are not positing extremely esoteric and like niche leftist views that you have to go into like volumes of, you know, out of the bookstore type literature and like so you can find like one nugget of information to be like, see, this validates my you know, off the wall economic conspiracy theory. That's not what this is. We are gathering information that is readily available on Wikipedia, readily available in the World Bank's own records, in the IMF's records, in the United States records, in individual countries' national poverty line records. This isn't off the wall and bizarre data that we're drawing from whatsoever.
And it's not exactly controversial that the CIA has ever overthrown another government or been involved in overthrowing another government, or that, like, you know, any of this history is like, at all like, revisionist or anything. Like, and for the most part, right? Like we were talking about, I think like an episode or two ago about how like, if you literally just shaved like 1/16 or like even like a quarter of like the military budget, right? You could literally take that money and build America into like a soft social democracy with like healthcare infrastructure, education, and all this other stuff, and still be like this monster, this global like tentacle monster.
You could still terrorize the world.
Yeah, you could still do that, right? And have enough, right?
You
and
could
you would
still
probably
undermine self-determination across
Right.
the entire globe.
Right. In fact, you might actually make people that would ordinarily be like, like us, that are they're ardently like, just not only like constitutionally like in disagreement over the way that America, acts as the hegemon of the world, but like, want to completely subvert the system. You would probably have people similar to us be in support of like American hegemony if you literally just did that. If you literally just like allowed, like a Bernie style like, government right into power, you'd probably find a lot more people willing to, wave the red, white, and blue flag and, consider themselves an American patriot.
Bold. It's a bold prediction.
It's look,
I would do
it's
it
a
more.
wild idea, right? But we're not exactly dealing like with the most well-educated populace, one that is aware of like, all of like these very evil, vile things that America does, like, across the globe, pretty much like since its foundation, right? So we already do have so many people that like, even when they are made aware, are like, oh, we have to do it because America is the greatest. It was born great and has been perfect ever since, and has only been more perfect with every year.
Correct.
But that's just, I don't know. That's just my harebrained take. I don't know. I could be incredibly wrong.
Yeah. So just kind of like through what we had discussed earlier in regards to protectionism and at least having being able to be autonomous with the tariffs that you impose. Let's talk about tariffs for a second, right? Because like maybe if you're not very educated on international economic relations, then you might not even really know what like a tariff is.
What the fuck is a tariff?
A tariff is essentially a tax that a nation can impose on imports that are coming into a country. So for example, let's say that like widgets, should we use widgets? Like this is an econ class or something like that. So like,
what's a
let's
widget?
say in Subversive land, the country that we have and operate here with, it's me, you, and Sam and Lily. We produce here widgets, and it costs us $5 per widget to produce them, and we sell them on our domestic market. And our economy is extremely dependent towards this widget production. It is a central tenet of the cycle of capital throughout our country. Let's say that there's a much larger, let's say Hassan Pikers community in the Hassan and Piker land can create widgets. It's so massive that obviously that their production of widgets, they can do it at $1.50 per widget, because they are just so massive and they have so much productive capacity that they can produce widgets that are so much cheaper than the ones that we can, that it's economically viable for individuals in our community to purchase these widgets from them because they're that much cheaper. Well, we can mitigate that by imposing a tariff on, which is essentially a tax of those goods being imported in, so that they don't destabilize our economy to a degree that it pretty much makes our entire country fall apart. So even though that they can be acquired for $1.50 or like whatever, if that's the production cost, maybe there's like, it's a little hot.
But are they as good quality widgets as what we're able to make?
I don't know. So as not to have our entire internal economy destabilized through a process of other maybe perhaps subsidized commodities flowing in from another country that can severely undercut our own widget production and send us into economic disarray, we can impose a tariff on that. That brings it closer to parity or even above what it costs to acquire them domestically. So this is why tariffs are so important, or at least are important for the economic survival of many countries. So what the World Trade Organization does is says, fuck that. So obviously, this creates an incredibly favorable economic climate for Western countries that can, and massive corporations that the Western countries are beholden to proliferate all of these products and even foodstuffs that they subsidize in their own country, and thus can massively undercut the production of maybe that commodity within that country. So thus, maybe if you're a farmer in Burkina Faso, that I'm basing this on almost no factual information. This is just all hypothetical. Perhaps you're a cotton farmer in Burkina Faso, and then you have waves of unsubsidized, untariffed cotton imports that are flowing into your country. Your ability to produce cotton is severely hampered.
Right.
So you can't compete on a market domestically because of an inflow of imported. So your in domestic industry of cotton production is essentially handicapped to a degree that it can't even function.
And we can't even tax them as they try and like
you
just
may want to
flood our domestic market.
Good idea. And routinely they decide that that's a good idea, but we cannot.
But it's our country.
Well, you can try to nationalize it or resist it, but we'll kill you.
Oh, right.
We've done it a bunch of times. Don't think that we won't. Like, you can try to call our bluff, but we've done it, and we will continue to do it. So, good luck. And this is all voluntary, by the way. This is the beauty. This is the beautiful, virtuous nature of liberal capitalism. Is that you can opt out of any of these business relations, whatever you want, I guess. But you can't.
Like you can
starve.
Yes, you're open to not doing it this way, but it comes at a price, like being murdered or or your entire economy just being just shut down, or you'll get locked out of like, you know, the global financial system.
Yeah. So
this is wait, this is why I think a lot of times like people are like, well, how come China doesn't just, you know, fund revolutionary parties or something like across the world? And it's like, while they have a very large domestic economy, I don't think that they would be able to make it as like not even just a hermit country that's just locked out from like global trade, but also like it's not just going to be that they're going to get locked out. It's also that like they're going to be like invaded and they're going to be like pressured out of every other economy that they're in.
Sure. Yeah.
But whatever, that's a whole different conversation for another stream.
Absolutely. So, let's see. So there is a pretty interesting hypothetical scenario used to, or allegorical scenario used by Cambridge economist Han-Ju Chang to kind of illustrate this idea of protectionism, and kind of like, you know, obviously it's not a one-to-one comparison. I always take these kind of comparisons with a grain of salt because I feel like they're always like extremely reductive. And this one probably falls into that category also, but it does illustrate this dynamic of forcible free trade on developing economies, and why it can be so detrimental. So I brought up Ha-Joon Chang multiple times on this stream. He is the author of 23 Things That They Don't Tell You About Capitalism. It's a great book, especially if you're just kind of wetting your beak in this subject of economics and, you know, why free marketeering may not or absolutely is not the most favorable economic policy. But he puts it together like this. My neighborhood was tough growing up. Everybody had to wear lobster bibs. This is actually This shirt was actually featured on Seinfeld. This is actually the exact shirt that maybe not the exact shirt, but at least something.
It's an homage.
It's an homage to Seinfeld. Yeah. So Hanjun Chang illustrates the problems of this theory by using an example of his very young son, Jin Yu. I think you would pronounce that Yu, right? Gyu. I know it's a Korean name. I apologize for my atrocious imperialist tongue not being able to pronounce such names. So I'm going to go with Yu. Jin Yu. If Jin Yu is going to have a chance to become something great and succeeding in the world, hey, what's up, Dorian? Then he will need many years of parental protection and investment to make sure that he stays healthy, that he attends good school and has plenty of time to focus on his studies before being let loose into the world to make it his own. But what if we were to apply the logic of free trade to the Chang family? We might say that little Jin Yu lives in an economic bubble. His parents subsidize his idle existence, and he is protected from the harsh realities of competition. What he needs is to have the subsidies cut off, get a job, and make a living for himself. This will force him to become productive and efficient. But, Chang argues, if I drive Jin Yu into the labor market at the age of 6, he may become a savvy shoeshine boy, or even a prosperous hawker. But he will never become a brain surgeon or a nuclear physicist. That would require at least another dozen years of my protection and investment. Likewise, Chang says, industries in developing countries will not survive if they are exposed to international competition too early. They need time to improve their capabilities by mastering advanced technologies and building effective organizations. This is the essence of infant industry protection. Infant industry protection, at least for a certain period of time, is the only way that poor countries have a shot at becoming anything more than the national equivalent of a shoeshine boy.
Welcome, Dorian. Welcome, Wolf Skeptic.
Dorian and Wolf Skeptic. The crew is
here. Our most dedicated chatters. What the fuck is it? So, like, yeah, I'm surprised that he didn't, like, try to mention, you know, like, instead of him playing Minecraft all day long, why don't I just throw him into a real mine, you know? He longs for the mines.
And, like, while I said, I never embrace these types of these examples as, you know,
right,
one-to-one allegories for complex economic dynamics. But I do believe that this is a very salient illustration of the situation where, like, yes, of course, you can end your protectionist subsidizing way of your child and you can get them out and work in the family at 6 years old. They'll probably lose their fingers. You know what I mean? But, you know, at least they're out there and they're really giving the free market a chance. Whereas if you subsidized and employ a protectionist philosophy with your child's education and ultimately professional development, you may find a much more efficient and prosperous lane for that being.
What if I infect him with COVID like multiple times before he's done, you know, getting to the age of 10, with like unknown consequences towards his like neurological and physical development?
This also reminds me of like you sometimes you hear like extremely stupid people be like, you know, it's the problem with kids today. They don't get beat enough.
Yeah.
Maybe punched your kid in the head more, then he would be like a better kid or something like that. And it's like, yeah, you know, there's no like, you know, causal relationship between abuse and trauma and addiction and suicidality and all of these things. You know what I mean? Like, that's the problem. We're not hitting them enough. This is something it's from people.
It's always like the most deranged person too, the most like unhealthy person, like stating these things. Like, well, back in my day, you know, my father used to beat me until I was unconscious, and I turned out just fine. It's like, no, you didn't, bro.
I only struggled with heroin for like a decade.
Yeah.
Now I work at a treatment center.
Now I'm a greeter at Walmart.
Give me 30 seconds.
Now I'm a greeter at Walmart that, you know, every day I have to wonder, is today going to be my final day working at Walmart because the disgruntled assistant manager is going to come in with an AR-15? Fucking yeah, no, we live in great, normal, stable country, having a grand old time, and everybody's doing okay. This is the place of freedom and liberty and truthiness, and it's going great. It's going great. I've heard people say, if you have a home and an iPhone, then life ain't bad. You can't complain about life. It's like, well, what if I want to complain about like the system of inequality that causes other people not to have a home and like not to have an iPhone or food or like, any sort of shelter or anything like that. Like, I think people always like confuse that, like, that like I don't think that like I've had any kind of like privilege or benefit from the system. I absolutely have. That's unquestionable, right? But like the idea is that like I don't think it should be this way, that like only a certain number of people get to experience that. I think that like a lot of the times people forget that like no, I'm not criticizing that like, oh, I don't have enough or something like that. It's mostly that like this isn't extended to everyone.
Mhm. Yeah, I just came in at the very tail end of that, but I agree with that like wholeheartedly. Like, I visited a good portion of other countries that are considered the third world, and like I'll admit that like many people's existence in the United States is much more comfortable, and that's just a consequence of being in a more developed country. You will have a more comfortable infrastructure. Your roads are going to just be better. Your schools are just going to be better by almost circumstance. Obviously, there's extremely impoverished areas of this country that are more akin to certain places. Like, obviously, I've been to places in Mexico and Peru and definitely in India that are better than some places in Camden, New Jersey or Philadelphia. You know what I mean? Like, you'd be much happier walking down the street in some neighborhoods in Mexico than you would in some neighborhoods in Philadelphia. I promise you that. But by and large, we are dealing with a much more comfortable existence here. But the fact of the matter is it comes to a moral dilemma of, it's like, if my comfortability is extracted from the blood and suffering of many countless individuals across the third world, am I comfortable with that? And is there anything I can do to alleviate that suffering, even if it means sacrificing some degree of my comfortability?
Also, I noticed that you didn't mention Kensington.
Right. Well, Kensington is one of those neighborhoods. But yeah, there's even jokes, like if anybody's from like the Philadelphia area or like the New Jersey area, there's jokes. It's like, wow, it's really tragic what happened in Baghdad. Oh wait, never mind. That's and it's a picture of like some like burned down row homes in Kensington or Camden or something like that. It's like some joke that looks like as degraded as a war zone. Not saying that those are necessarily comparable, but it's become to the degree where it's like a meme of the culture.
Right. Well, that like lends itself into the debate that like is it not war? Is it not a class war that goes on every day in this country? That like the working class and those of the lumpen proletariat are losing every single day. But that's a whole other topic for another day.
So I know we just went way off topic, and hopefully on this whole concept of free trade and the World Trade Organization. But let's illustrate that a little bit further with another example from the book. Let's go to Benin, Burkina Faso, Mali, and Chad, which are all major African cotton producers.
The cotton four.
What was that?
They're literally referred to in the book as the cotton four.
Exactly. A total of 8 million workers are employed in their cotton industry, making the largest private employer in these countries, and 13 million people rely directly on their incomes. But they find themselves up against a wall. Because of subsidies that the U.S. government hands out to its own cotton producers, the global price of cotton is around 10% lower than it otherwise might be. And that is 10% loss that these countries, which are some of the poorest countries in the world, can ill afford. If they are to have any chance of development, they need a fair price for their cotton exports, not one purposely distorted by the United States. The Cotton Four, as they are known, have taken their case to the World Trade Organization, pointing out that the U.S. subsidies are illegal under the World Trade Organization rules, but the U.S. has refused to back down.
Welcome, Grave Wax.
Hey, Grave Wax, how's it going? So this is a illustration or an example of how this World Trade Organization dominated economic climate favors Western countries dramatically more and further immiserates countries such as Burkina Faso and Benin to a degree where they can't even subsist on their domestic agricultural processes. And then also it also illuminates the hypocritical decision making of the United States, where and I say this, I've been saying this routinely, but subsidies for me, but not for thee. We will very, very, very gladly subsidize our own agricultural markets, but through the World Trade Organization and through structural adjustment, you cannot subsidize your own.
Right. Well,
good.
He mentions in the book this figure Yash Tandon, I believe is Ugandan, right? He states that trade is war, and the war is being waged by the North against the South. And it's funny because I've heard what's his name, Ben Norton, Abby Martin, and a slew of other people refer to sanctions and embargoes, and all these other things as siege warfare. But it looks like just the regular trade, right, that goes on where they're not being sanctioned and embargoed and they're being compliant, right, is also war. The whole thing is just violence on the global South, and it's just violence upon these countries that are being ravaged of their natural resources, and having their entire workforce that they're being used for brutalized with little to any reward.
And it's violence that is packaged in this liberal free market concealment, which is then sold as the medicine for impoverishment, when in reality, like you said, it is institutionalized violence through institutions like the World Bank, the IMF, and the World Trade Organization, being force-fed to these countries that have no choice but to engage on them. And this is where, maybe a socialist country will be criticized for violence. It'll be criticized for standing up against this and maybe wanting to have national autonomy over the resources. Maybe it'll be called violent for having some type of a militarized opposition to this forcible acquiescence to this global hegemonic liberal structure. And that's the hypocrisy of everything, is that, it's violence for me and not for thee, and it's right. They point their finger from their ivory tower and say, you're being violent, when in reality, the very structures that they're imposing and the very implicit consequence of the economies that they impose on these countries is in itself violent.
Right. And if you go out into the streets and start protesting, against this violence that's being imposed on you and your people, or even the idea that you're receiving aid, why are you throwing it back in their face, right? The media, right? The inventing reality machine that Michael Parenti talks about, or the manufacturing consent machine that Noam Chomsky writes about, will paint you as these people in the global South, they don't know what they need, they don't know what they want, and it's it makes no sense why they would protest.
Well, it just brings to this day. The concept of the white man's burden has never left the imperial core countries in the relations with other countries. To this day, the same paternalistic idea that we are the the beacons of enlightenment and civilization of the world still exist today. Maybe it's not Theodore Roosevelt imposing this upon the Philippines in a direct way where he says that non-white people require white people to bring them civilization violently if necessary. Now it is high tower economists who are giving these prescriptions to developing countries as to how they're supposed to flourish in a free market system, while actually kneecapping them from the very things that could provide that prosperity, and then looking down and turning their nose down on them for being corrupt or something like that's something that you so hear is
right.
like, oh, it's not because of the colonialism that they endured or the neo-colonial economic policies that we forced them into. The nations in Africa, they're poor because of corruption. They just can't put together because those people, they don't know how to interact with one another. They don't know how to not be corrupt. And it's like Patrice Lumumba attempted to dismantle this, and you forced them back into Mobutu. Mobutu may be the most corrupt individual to ever walk the continent of Africa, and you fucking supported it.
Thank you, Vlad the Victor, and thank you, Gravewax, for the sub. Thank you so very kindly.
Whoa. Thank you guys so much. That's so awesome.
We are indebted to you. And to get back to like what Pat was saying, about like us supporting like Ubuntu and all these other just freaks, right? And putting them in power, making sure that they stay in charge, right? The idea that like the tool in which like we analyze, right, the world doesn't even acknowledge people like Mobutu. It doesn't even acknowledge any of this stuff. It's based purely around this like this weird math that ignores any and all historical analysis or grounding for any of these things.
Go outside your house, walk down the street with a clipboard, ask 100 people about what they think about Fidel Castro, and ask 100 people what they think about Mobutu. And see, and I'm not even trying to like play a game of equivocating the two. I'm just saying, why would the group be so much more knowledgeable or impressed upon them to have an opinion about one of these people, but have literally probably don't even know about the other one? I'm saying the average person walking down the street does not know much about Mobutu or the gross autocratic control that he exerted upon the Congo or Zaire. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And what's sad is that like,
and for his efforts of being the Malcolm X of Africa, he was dismembered and broken down with acid inside of a barrel, or burned inside of a barrel.
No, he was thrown inside of a barrel of acid, and one of the Belgians actually took one of his teeth as a trophy. What the fuck? Right? Like the guy might as well have been wearing a fucking plinth helmet. Like, what the fuck? And what like makes it worse is that like,
and then what was the result of that? They claim it was some kind of a measure of protection for the Congolese people, that whatever Patrice Lumumba was going to do was going to be so detrimental to the democracy and the freedom of them. And then in the same breath, they reimpose Mobutu, who immiserates the country, enriches himself in one of the most grotesque ways out of any autocratic ruler that I've ever seen, and exercises no amount of democracy, exercises no amount of freedom against his rule or freedom of expression. It's the most vapid, hypocritical bullshit that is ever uttered on the foreign policy stage.
Right. Oh, but like wait,
hold on, Wolf Skeptic. Did you just pull this up? I didn't even hear about this. This was in July of 2022 that Belgium returned the fucking tooth of Patrice Lumumba back to the Congo.
I believe it was known that they had it for a little bit longer than 2022, but yeah, they just returned it in 2022. But like, no, Pat,
you so much for bringing that to my attention.
They named it like a city square after him.
What?
They named a city square after him
in Belgium.
I think so. Yeah.
That's like when the United States is like, yeah, this is Martin Luther King Drive.
Martin Luther King Boulevard, man. Something good is always going on there.
this is the nominal. Yeah, this counts as reparations. This counts as reparations, right? Yeah, exactly. This is the nominal lip service bullshit that the imperial core countries do to feign adoration for
Right.
those that resisted the very things that they were imposing upon people. Other than actually changing the structures that continue to create these inequities that caused these individuals to rise to prominence, they just offer, here's a street, oh, here's a day after them, you get a month or something like that. Oh, Nelson Mandela's great now, we all love Nelson Mandela, he's a freedom fighter. We all love Martin, even Malcolm X has been rehabilitated within the culture to a pretty significant degree. Didn't somebody write about this, that you get vilified at first and then eventually your character becomes like rehabilitated in like a whitewashed form, and that gets like that'll get recycled through the liberal media?
I mean, so many different people have like written about that, but like I think even Malcolm X can be quoted saying,
defang the revolutionary fervor of an individual, and then they like, you know, proliferate this placated version of them.
Yeah. That's like, I think practically every revolutionary, and if they can't find any means or ways to whitewash you, they'll just make up shit about you, you know, to vilify you anyways. Right? Yeah, like Che, or you know, fucking what the fuck is it? Another guy from like, you know, the Russian Revolution, but you know, that's a different story for a different day. We'll talk about that later.
We're just getting started here. Hold
on. Or like. Did my message send? It did not, Helda Rose.
In chat. Would it be in chat or would it be in some... I'm still confused about how all this works. Would it go to chat or would it go to some like private thing?
No, I'm it's a first time chat, but I'm not seeing any kind of like messages or anything. I'm sorry, Helda Rose.
Yeah, if you want to resend it, go ahead. I'm so interested in that gold capped tooth thing. I'm so happy Wolf Skeptic brought that up, because like I just love like this idea in my head of Belgium kind of like dragging their feet, like, hey, you know, we're here, you can like pull it out of their pocket in a handkerchief, like,
we're sorry.
We're sorry that we undermined your self-determination and imposed, you know, brutal autocratic dictatorship on you. Can you forgive us and sell us cobalt? I mean, we're gonna take it anyway. You're gonna put your children in the mines. You're gonna put your children in the mines and extract it regardless, but we'll pretend to care.
Right.
And that's the best you're gonna get.
Right. And then they'll make like, you know, some movie about them or something, you know, and like cast some actor that's just gonna like totally whitewash any sort of like revolutionary message about them, and then you're gonna have like a bunch of people doing like YouTube videos about like, you know, how like this person was so great, you know, or you're gonna have people like debating on Twitter about how like actually they were a bad, awful person. Like I was, let's see here. Like I was saying, for the worst part of the institutions, like to weaponize the legacies of these people. For example, the only talking point we addressed from MLK is his "I Have a Dream" speech and its message about content of character, but we never hear what he has to say about reparations.
Exactly. If you actually look into there's a book called The Sword and the Shield about Martin Luther King and Malcolm X. It's called The Sword and the Shield, and it's the revolutionary history of them. And Martin Luther King, if you get into his writings, not only was he like vehemently opposed to colonization and imperialism, not only was he a significant proponent for reparations, and more than just like this kind of like colorblind idea of reparations, but also he had scathing criticisms of the Vietnam War, support for the Vietnamese, was it the National Liberation Front, NLF? Is that the Vietnamese? I don't refer to them by the slur that is commonly put upon them. Is it the NLF?
I thought, yeah, isn't that what like was it the Viet Minh or something?
Well, the Viet Minh was against France, but the other one, the Viet C, is actually considered a slur. It's that is not what they referred to themselves as. But Martin Luther King supported them. And also, Martin Luther King went to Ghana and visited Kwame Nkrumah and had a glowing reception about the Marxist revolution that was happening in Ghana. So never forget that Martin Luther King was based as fuck. If you already didn't know that Martin Luther King was based as fuck, he's even more based when you actually research his actual beliefs.
Yeah, I can't find. I used to know this, but like there's only so much I can like retain.
I don't know if you ever heard that, but a Vietnamese person told me that it's the National Liberation Front. They go by another term commonly in American media, the Viet C, not the Viet Minh, but the Viet C, and that's actually a slanderous term. Damn, did my oh, there it goes. Okay, I'm back in focus. But yeah, apparently the Viet C is actually like calling them the N-word. That's what a Vietnamese person told me.
Was not aware of that. I don't know. Maybe one day we can ask Luna.
It's the National Liberation Front. Is that's what I was referring to? The National Liberation Front. Yeah.
All right. Yeah.
Martin Luther King based. Helder Rose, you're exactly right. We should totally do an entire stream on like. Yeah. Well, Viet Minh, okay, this is the way that I understand it. I would never disagree with Luna, obviously, but the way that I understood is that the Viet Minh was what Ho Chi Minh initially organized when he was in his war against the French. And then in the war against the Americans, what is commonly referred to as the Viet C by Americans was actually called the NLF.
What's it with Sam?
Front. That's the way that I understand it. I'm sure Luna is ridiculously more educated than me on that subject. And I draw a lot of my understanding from the content from a lot of her extremely informative videos. There isn't really like a better source on YouTube. So, but yeah, MLK, hell yeah. We support MLK here. Even though he said that he wasn't really down with Marxism, like that's fine. He can disagree with that. And I support him in his disagreements in that, if that's the conclusion that he came to. But he also said that he appreciated a lot of the works of Marx.
And Sam, it's from...
Martin Luther King was a very religious person. So somebody that's very religious might look at certain things, certain tenets that are associated with Marxism, like atheism and things like that, and be like, well, that's not going to be for me. So I think that had a lot to do with Martin Luther King's distaste for like orthodox Marxism, but also he was very, very much in favor of redistributive policies, socialistic policies for restructuring the American economy, and opposing that. What did he say? We have socialism for the rich and rugged individualism for the poor.
Yes.
He definitely
towards the end of his life.
Yes, Sam. Why I Oppose the War in Vietnam by MLK is his best speech according to Kwame Ture. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, it was his last speech that he made before, he got. Well, not last speech, but that was like the last big one that he did. It was at some church event or something like the year before. That's actually the speech that made everyone kind of distance themselves from him and not want to fuck with him anymore, especially because he was coming out against the Vietnam War. That's what lost him a lot of politicians, supporting him and stuff.
And you literally have people like Steven Crowder being like, you know what? Well, I'm like Martin Luther King. I think that we should not judge people on the content of their color of skin, but the content of their character. It's like so disgustingly reappropriated by pieces of shit.
Yeah. Well, because fucking I'd like to see Crowder, what the fuck is it? Cover the white moderate speech that he gave.
Yeah.
Or how the dream has turned into a nightmare. But there's a lot.
Like Helder Rose was saying, there's literally other than one line of I have a dream that is constantly regurgitated, and it's all that anyone really even knows about Martin Luther King on a surface level. Almost any of his other beliefs, political or social prescriptions, or ideas about other countries such as Vietnam or Ghana under Kwame Nkrumah, admitted outright Marxist-Leninist Kwame Nkrumah, they would find that he is not the liberal savior that they can parade around as I have a black friend that believes the things that I believe.
Right. Amazing Wolf Skeptic. It's funny that you mentioned that, because if you look at a map of New Jersey, right, there's literally every other town is named after, like,
Mattawan
nation.
and-
Right? Yeah, Mattawan. There's Sakasana. There's
Susquehanna,
fucking
yeah.
even what the fuck is it? God damn it.
Caucus.
Delaware. Delaware is literally
Delaware.
like a language group.
Mhm.
There's a lot, but like there is hardly any like ever mentioned of any kind of indigenous or First Nation issues, like, within New Jersey, which is like a lot to get into right now. If we're not going to get bogged down by that, but I would like to at some point bring on some people that are definitely way more educated than me or Pat on these issues.
Last thing before we get back into the content of the book, just by Sam, he was very unpopular in his day. That's true.
Yes.
If you look at it, like there was like polls on Martin Luther King's approval rating, and they were abysmal prior to him dying.
Yeah.
Like maybe not throughout his entire political career or whatever you want to refer to it as, but before he was assassinated, he was at like an all-time low of popularity.
If we brought Nick Estes on, I would definitely, I would lose my shit. Yes, the host of Red Nation podcast. If we got Nick Estes on, like, oh my god, like, and apparently, like, he's actually looking. I mean, I heard him on what the hell is it? The East is a podcast talking about how like everybody always wants to talk to me about like indigenous stuff. Like, I'm a Marxist too. Like, I've read Marx, and I'd love to talk about that too.
I would love any of that. Obviously, the more our community grows, the easier it's going to be for us to bring on these individuals that we all would like to talk to and hear their opinions. So not for like, some kind of a shameless plug or promotion here, but obviously the more followers and more subscribers that we get when we go to the table to ask somebody like Vijay Prashad, who me and Johnny have met before and discussed things with, when it comes down to like, hey, would you come onto our stream? The more people that we have following us, the better, the more likely that those things are going to happen.
The real question is going to be like, which VJ book do we read to bring him on?
Well, it's going to be Washington Bullets or the third,
Right.
the Red Star of the Third World. Those are like, in my opinion, the two foundational texts of Prashad thought.
Should we try and do Chomsky? Like, I guess we could. We're like totally,
Absolutely. I would absolutely talk with Noam Chomsky. That would be incredible.
I would want to ask him about like, what it was like, to debate what the fuck's his name, Foucault and shit, and like watching what?
William F. Buckley?
Oh, or William F. Buckley, but I don't know. Like, I'm kind of more, because the right wing hasn't waned. It's still present. It's just evolved into this other like grotesque form. But like, when you think about it, like, nobody has a what?
You've been talking about the Foucault debate?
Yeah. Because like, think about it. Like, there's no like French postmodernist like theorist, going on like CNN or MSNBC. Like, nobody's, bringing them on to ask them their opinion about anything. Like, when you think about it, like, there's nothing left of that kind of trend or that like kind of community of people that like used to be on TV like all the time. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's just a very weird, like, how that kind of just declined like really quickly from like the 70s into like the 90s. But
I would say that's like an overall like anti-intellectual distillation of mainstream media. You know what I mean? Like at a time, like, there was like a little bit more of like a robust atmosphere for like, and that I'm using that term very fucking generally. I'm being very with that fucking.
This is a pro age of consent Twitch stream.
Guys, maybe we should just like take a deep one real quick to just throw that out there. But we are.
I'm not interested in interviewing. I don't blame you, Sam. I think that like Chomsky
isn't at like the top of our list of individuals that we're gunning for. You know what I mean? Like we have individuals like Vijay, Gerald Horn, these individuals from the Indigenous podcast, and I'm not very knowledgeable on, but I know Johnny is very much. Like these are the individuals that we are seeking out for.
There's a lot of criticisms that can be raised to Chomsky, his work. There's a lot of criticisms that you can make, but you at the same time can't help but acknowledge, right, the importance that he has had for a lot of this tradition, like of the left, of kind of getting into more like radical trains of thought. And like, I'm definitely not the only one on this Twitch stream that like started out reading Chomsky. I'm sure there's entire generations of people who like Chomsky was like their stepping stone, to get to somebody like Parenti, or to get to, all of these other very radical writers or very radical figures, right?
Well, and also, at the end of the day, just a few months ago, me and Johnny visited a conference where with Vijay Prashad and Noam Chomsky speaking in a joint book regarding a book that they co-authored together. So even to this day, like regardless of, like Dorian said, criticisms aside, there is a avowed Marxist-Leninist in that has chosen to write a book with Chomsky, and Chomsky has reciprocated that desire to work alongside one another, despite I'm sure that they have obvious disagreements on a couple of subjects that we all know of, but they're able to put that aside and produce a book criticizing American empire.
Yeah, it was like what, the pullout or something?
The withdrawal.
Oh, right. The
pullout.
The pullout, whatever the hell it was called. I have a copy. But I have to draw the line at Robert Evans. Forget that guy. Oh, no, look. Trust me, as far as like the postmodernist like French theorists and shit, ever since I got into like Gabriel Rockhill, I think that all postmodernism is like a giant waste of time. And I think that like a lot of authors and theorists that like I greatly admire would probably be better off like without their influence of like these fucking weirdos. But that's just me. That's just my opinion. I'm not like, I'm not going to say that like I'm right. I just think that like it could be more material in analysis. That's all.
So we just went way off topic. It was fun.
Got extremely off topic.
I yelled about Mobutu. I screamed in support of Martin Luther King. Two things I don't get to do very often in my day-to-day life. So I'm grateful for that. But we're going to draw it back into the book, back into the content. And I know it seems weird to jump right back on this, but just in regards to that situation that we were talking about, the cotton producers in Africa, the Cotton Four, and how they are recognizing that the subsidies that they aren't able to employ are being employed in the United States, thus reducing the price of cotton and destroying their own domestic industries. Let's see how impotent their claims to that happening are on the stage as it is litigated by the World Trade Organization. So under the World Trade Organization, the Cotton Four have the option of taking the U.S. to court, the disputes settlement body, and the court will probably rule in their favor. So that's great. The Cotton Four can go to this regulatory body at the World Trade Organization and be like, America's subsidizing their cotton and it's destroying our unsubsidized cotton industry. And the World Trade Organization will look down and be like, you're right, you win. But you have to understand that the only recourse for a country that wins in these types of deliberations is that enforcement is left up to the plaintiffs. Should they win the case, the Cotton Four would be entitled to place sanctions on the U.S. But what use are sanctions from a little group of 4 countries against the richest and most powerful economy in the world? So now we see this like gross power imbalance that exists on the stage in the World Trade Organization, where they can say to the World Trade Organization, this isn't fair. And the World Trade Organization is like, you're right, you win. You get to sanction them. And they're like, okay, well, we'll literally starve to death if we sanction them and we can't sell our cotton. Hey, Bisky, how's it going? Thanks for being in chat.
Welcome, Bisky.
But you see what I'm saying? Like how it's like, This brings us back to the very quote that started this chapter by Nelson Mandela that says, prisoners cannot engage in negotiations. Only free men can engage in negotiations. So look at Burkina Faso in this grossly imbalanced negotiation. Burkina Faso is a economic prisoner to the market of the United States and thus has absolutely no recourse to the absolutely unequal policies that are being enforced upon it, other than starvation.
Bisky, we are a proud anti-capitalist, anti-colonialist Twitch stream. and Facebook group and Twitter, soon YouTube channel.
Let's go. Bang, bang.
So, yeah, like no matter what, these countries, like, to resist is to be punished. To go along with the hegemony of the U.S., right, or the global North in general, is to be punished. You can't win.
I'm an anti-capitalist, but I have a bit of a problem.
What's the problem?
Would you like to voice your problem? You're welcome to.
Hey, Helda, this group, this started as a Facebook page.
Yeah. And I guess that's like my like boomer nature with social media, is that like I only use Facebook, so I just started it as a Facebook group that I could like write some like kind of like historical essays and share them around into leftist groups. So that was really the social media presence that initiated all this. So I'm sorry if my boomer-esque nature in social media has offended you, and I understand. I understand your dilemma.
The problem is, and please take me seriously, okay, I'm not trolling at all, but when I say this, I swear on BTS. Okay?
What is BTS?
I don't know.
Boycott, divest, sanction?
No, because divest starts with a
I know. Isn't that what that's called? The BDS movement, like against Israel?
Yeah.
What is BTS? I'm not so online. What is the BTS?
Oh, Dorian says it's a K-pop group. I am kind of sort of in love with Elon Musk a bit, and I don't know what to do. I'm kind of going away from him, but I am a mess, bro. BTS is a K-pop group and so cute. All right, well, like, look, as far as like K-pop goes, look, every artist, right, every actor, even the ones that, like you say, that say that like they're like lefty or whatever, they're all horrible people. Every musician ever is a horrible person.
I don't think we have to give this much serious response.
Right. All right. And as far as like the Musk thing goes, like I don't know, man. Like he's a lol cow, so like fuck it.
Yeah, just watch Debunking Elon Musk. It's on the channel. It's a really hilarious video on Common Sense Skeptic. That's what it is. Debunking Elon Musk on Common Sense.
$50. Bisky is an actual 14-year-old. Yeah, I mean, like, hey, look, I wish there was shit like this when I was 14, 18 even, right? Like, I wish this stuff existed, that I could even be exposed to it. So it's just like, whatever, Bisky. I mean, like, if you're down for it, you know, yeah. And like you pick up something, right, you know, for like when you're, you know, like ready to pick up a book and stuff like that, start organizing and shit like that. All right, cool, you know. But like, if it's just like jokes and, you know, a little bit of trolling, whatever, it's cool too. Don't worry about it.
So, just to get further into the Biscuit's good face, I'll drop 5 subbies in the chat right now. Back to the book. So now this whole World Trade Organization situation evolved into what is known as NAFTA, which is the North American Free Trade Agreement that existed between Canada, Mexico, and the United States. This came into effect in 1994 and cut most tariff barriers to the flow of goods between the three countries. The agreement was highly controversial and widely resisted by voters in all three countries. In Mexico, hundreds of thousands of farmers took to the streets of the capital with their tractors in protest, fearing that they would be unable to compete with subsidized American corn. Newsflash, they were right. They were correct. When NAFTA came into effect, American corn flooded into Mexico and undercut local producers. Some 2 million farmers were driven out of business and forced to leave their land. As if to add insult to injury, much of the newly vacated land was then acquired by foreign firms that consolidated large plantations. a scenario not unlike the process of enclosure described in chapter 3. If you remember, the process of enclosure was when Britain transitioned from a feudal economy into a capitalist economy and did many things to drive the serfs off of their ancestral land, where they were content to just till for their own subsistence, and force them into wage labor transactions. We covered that already. I can't go any more deeper into that. You can look up
if maybe at some point, like, we go over Caliban and the Witch. I know that Sylvia covers it like really good. So maybe like we'll get to that at some point in the future.
Of course.
But yeah.
Just to finish this one up, and just as with enclosure elsewhere in the world, many of the displaced farmers had no choice but to accept low-wage work in the sweatshops that sprang up near the U.S. border as American corporations, enabled by NAFTA, moved south to take advantage of cheaper labor. One might think that the subsidized corn from the United States would mean cheaper tortillas in Mexico, the region's staple food, and surely this would be a good thing for the country's poor. But paradoxically, the opposite happened. Because NAFTA deregulated retail prices on food, the cost of tortillas shot up by 279% in the first decade, causing hunger and malnutrition to rise. So this is, again, another example of every single virtue that the United States and its constituent nations aim, or at least purport that they're attempting to do by implementing these policies around the world, which is to reduce hunger, reduce poverty, catalyze prosperity within these economies, is literally undermined by the very thing that they do.
Right. And NAFTA is one of those things, as governed by like the WTO, that you have to accept all conditions. You can't, this isn't like, NAFTA a la carte, where it's just like, we're okay with that one, but that one not so much. We like to make sure that like our domestic economy remains stable. It's like, nah, get fucked. No offense, but I don't like Americans.
Anyone that follows the history, if you notice that 1994, the imposition of NAFTA on the nation of Mexico is really the catalyst in the Zapatista movement. It was in 1994 that the Zapatista movement really began as a armed guerrilla insurgency against situations that were economic situations such as NAFTA. Obviously, they developed from, they kind of renounced, or I don't know about renounced, but they evolved from this guerrilla insurgency into the autonomous community that they currently exist as in Chiapas. But it was in this time in 1994 that really sprang them into action in response to NAFTA.
Right. Did we skip over the part about TRIPS, the trade-related aspects of intellectual property rights?
Is this the one that was regarding like the HIV medication and things like that?
Yeah. How to profit from a plague.
In that chapter, I don't know where my brain was. If you want to revisit that, let me just finish. I have this one more.
All right. Cool.
I have one more paragraph on this Mexico situation, and then we'll jump back to that. Okay.
All right.
So it was a dream scenario for U.S. companies. They get new export markets, they new access to land, higher retail revenues, and cheaper labor. Many large Mexican firms benefited too. Indeed, that is why the Mexican government agreed to NAFTA in the first place. But ordinary people suffered tremendously. The incomes of Mexican farm workers have fallen to 1/3 of their previous levels. Real wages across the board are lower, and the minimum wage is worth 24% less. 10 years after NAFTA, there were 19 million more Mexicans living in poverty than before NAFTA. More than half the population now lives below the poverty line. According to a recent report in the New York Times, 25% of the population does not have access to basic food, and 1/5 of Mexicans suffer from malnutrition. Since NAFTA came into effect, per capita income growth has been only 1.2% on average, less than half it was during the decades prior to NAFTA. So, as you can see, just a lot of very empirical data that shows the immiserating effect that this free trade policy has on the nation. And the neoliberal outcomes of when you impose this free trade. When you oppose these type of free trade things, what happened? Food prices shot up. Farmers went out of business. So what happens when the farmers go out of business? the land is bought by by the United States or another country that is looking to invest because they have the capital to do so. So now,
And then what
was
happens?
once
And then what happens to those farmers inside the United States?
exactly, yeah, that now these farmers, I would imagine a significant portion of them have to engage in this type of transient wage labor, which is extremely dangerous, and it doesn't even entitle you to like the wage labor law, the minimum wage labor laws that we are accustomed to in the United States. So overall, it just further enforces this neoliberal hoisting of markets at the expense of the human life.
Right. So then all the farmers in the U.S., right, this NAFTA deal led directly to the displacement of 682,900 U.S. jobs by 2010, most of which were high-paying, unionized manufacturing jobs. So not only is this bad for like the workers in Mexico who are like, forced to sell their land to large, corporations that like they can't really sue, they can't really fight against or anything like that and be exploited by these major corporations. Now you're seeing companies shut down unions, right? Shut down businesses that were unionized within the US to move them to this new playing field where they have the upper hand almost entirely.
Right. So let's jump back for a second to this. Like, this is like the intellectual property stage, right? And you're going to have to kind of take it away on this one because I'm a little bit ill prepared on this section. And I apologize to everybody. My school workload has been higher than usual this week. And just with everything going on, my preparation did suffer to some degree, and I apologize.
That's why there's two of us. So trade related aspects of intellectual property rights, or TRIPS, focuses on copyright and patent rules, right? The point of TRIPS is to raise patent standards and enshrine them on an international law, and this is being conducted ironically under the banner of liberalization. It is a contradiction in terms. By the end of the 19th century, right, patent laws were maybe about 13 years. By 1975, it was 17 years. And under TRIPS, right, rich countries have succeeded in imposing new, near 20-year standard on patents. And that's computer programs, agricultural implements, and medicines, most importantly, especially, because of, I don't know, the global fucking pandemic that, we've all been living through for the last 3 years. And developing countries have to pay an additional $60 billion per year in licensing fees to multinational companies because of TRIPS. Right. And the example, because of the year that this book was written and published, right, was prior to COVID, right, he uses the HIV/AIDS epidemic, and because he's from Swaziland, Africa, right, both of his parents were doctors in Swaziland, so he starts talking about that a lot, and talking about how the rate of infection almost exploded within a 2 to 5 year period, and not because there were no medicines. There were. The pandemic is not over. If anything, like we are very rapidly, approaching like more than one virus happening at the same fucking time. Whether you're talking about like the COVID and its many variants, or fucking monkeypox, or what's that new one going around that's like, apparently like can kill kids, like RSV. It's respiratory something. So like I was saying, like people were dying in Africa and Swaziland, specifically, as he talks about, not because there were no medicines. There were. The first anti-retroviral drugs were approved by the United States government in 1987, the year before his father diagnosed his first case. But they were priced at $15,000 per yearly course, which is out of reach for all but the richest people. Which is, why a lot of the times monkeypox is hardly a concern. I'm sure it's hardly of a concern now, but so long as things like COVID, right, are treated as like, hardly a concern, right, the more ability is given for these things to be passed along, and then, like any good virus, mutate into something that is far worse than the alpha variant that we originally experienced. Maybe this is feeding into my, agoraphobia or the other way around, but like that's just me. I'm no healthcare professional. So TRIPS put an end to this practice by extending corporate patents down to the level of the molecule itself, which is why, generics, right, are hard to get. During the AIDS crisis, generic firms in India were capable of producing and exporting antiretrovirals for as low as $350 per year, which would have been affordable enough to save millions of dying patients, but the WTO, pressured by pharmaceutical companies, actively prevented them from doing so, in the same way that, like, a lot of politicians in the US, right, are against bargaining, right, for generics from Canada, right? And this is the most important paragraph to me, the one that, like, stood out to me the hardest, is that the United States responded by threatening them with crushing sanctions through the WTO's court, and the world watched in horror as this callous move. But then something happened in the United States that weakened their case. In 2001, a number of Americans died of exposure to anthrax. The U.S. government feared that an epidemic might be on the horizon, possibly triggered by biological weapons. Just in case, they decided to stockpile Cipro, the antibiotic that treats anthrax. But Cipro was under patent by Bayer, making it very expensive to buy. So the US government stepped in and, citing a possible public health emergency, forced Bayer to suspend its patent so that generic versions could be produced. Pat, I want you to guess, how many people died of anthrax in 2001?
Like zero, right? I don't think anybody died of it, did they?
Well, I'll give you the number of how many people that were allegedly exposed. That number is 22. How many of those 22 people do you think died?
1.
5.
5.
So 5 people died because of an anthrax, letter thing, and we can maybe talk to Aaron Good at some point about, like, American exceptionalism and everything that happened there. 5 people died. Millions of people died throughout Africa. How you doing, armed with your opinions? So 5 people died in the U.S. and they suspended, this thing that's like, we can't make any exceptions, right?
Yeah, but what are we going to get all bent out of shape about AIDS in Africa? What do you expect? What do you expect? The money to stop rolling because of HIV in Africa? Like, I don't know if you realize this, but I don't live in Africa.
18 million people die each year because of preventable diseases, in large part because they lack access, the same way that they lack access to, driving a Ferrari, to affordable medicine. How does the pharmaceutical industry justify the exorbitantly high prices of these drugs if it has nothing to do with the cost of manufacture? 84% of research on pharmaceuticals is funded by governments and other public sources, while only 12% comes from the pharmaceutical industry. The products are, for the most part, publicly produced, then privately appropriated through the patent system. As for the argument that reinvesting in R&D, the pharmaceutical industry spends far more of its profits on marketing than on research, which suggests that the commitment to research is questionable at best. And I think it's like something like, what is it? The pharmaceutical industry spent $27 billion on marketing in the U.S. in 2012. 9 of the 10 largest companies spent more on marketing than they did on research and development. Anna Swanson, big pharmaceutical companies are spending more on marketing than research, as of this Washington Post article in 2015. So, do you remember when Oxford had developed a COVID vaccine, and Bill Gates was like, no, let me purchase, don't leave it unpatented, sell it to me, and then I'll make sure that everybody gets it. And then
I don't remember that specifically, but I can see it.
He bought the patent, and then it it did not make it easier. He did not. It took them like literally like almost a year into the pandemic for them to even start like getting the Oxford fucking vaccine to like Africa and all these other countries where or continents rather where the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation operates. I'm here to see what this channel is about. So far, I'm not impressed. Sound like a couple of bleeding hearts, and the physiognomy screams Chapo Trap House fans, especially little hipster boy in the suicide shirt. Now, don't get me wrong. I don't mind Ellen Vega. He's cool. But I'm just calling it how I see it, and you guys sound like you are broke. Get your bag up. If you made more money, you wouldn't complain right now, and that's facts. You didn't have to ban him. I don't give a shit. Come in here, fucking, I don't know, roast me. This is actually the first time that I've even been roasted. We let other people that were just like straight up ruthless to Pat.
I was gonna say, dude, like every person comes in here with like a fucking bullseye on my fucking head. I don't know why. Like they say, like, oh, you're drinking, you even drink dick drinks or something like that. It's like I can't
like that
without like getting called out about it.
Fucking, they were mocking like, you know, your clothes, your ears, everything, and it's just like I'm just like,
I'm like, Jesus Christ.
Look, if you want to come in here and like make fun of us, like whatever, I don't really fucking care. You have to follow us and boost our
You have
stats.
to follow us. Yeah.
To even comment. So like, what the fuck do I care?
Yeah. Also,
thank you Lily, for your service,
for your vigilance, for your vigilant protection of the stream. But like even like you know, the first person that came in, his name was like Shashank or something like that. Like,
look, I know I don't have to ban him. I'm just saying, like, the people who come in here and want to be like, you know, the reason that you complain about being broke is because you don't make enough money, and it's like, huh? Well, I wonder why that fucking is. Like, shut your mouth and listen for 2 seconds, and maybe you'll learn something.
Well, also, I make like a decent amount of money for like, you know, the world, especially, you know what I mean? Like,
right.
Like my standard of living isn't really like all that bad. And much of the things that I'm going to complain about here is not necessarily because it's like, I don't have enough money because I can't acquire the possessions that I want to, you know, feel a fleeting satiation in my otherwise existential dread. Like, that's not why I have like, you know, these types of political thoughts.
I kind of almost want them unbanned now. I want to see them come back.
I can unban him if you want. Give me a sec.
Fucking
apparently,
like, oh, and as far as like the
Dorian, apparently they're like a known person or something like that. They're like a known troll person.
What, my suicide?
Yeah,
I fucking love suicide. I don't fucking care. I thought he was making fun of Pat's shirt with the lobsters and shit, but like, you know, I don't fucking care. Bro, you think that like, you know, I've never had my musical taste made fun of? Like, Pat makes fun of my music taste all the fucking time. I was like, yo, should I make like a song for like the intro that's like a noise song or whatever? And you were just like, no one wants to fucking hear that shit.
Yeah. We're all having fun. So that's the most important part. Do you want to resume your the trips part that you're talking about? Or do you feel like did you hit all the points you wanted to?
I feel like that he doesn't really like, you know,
it's not a long chapter.
No, it's not. It's not a long chapter at all. And he, like, the idea behind TRIPS Plus is to extend U.S.-style patent laws to the rest of the world, so the producers in all countries have to obey U.S. patents.
I love that us like criticizing like intellectual property laws that prevent AIDS patients from getting the medications they need. It's like, man, y'all sound like you broke. If you was really about that bag, what you would be doing is synthesizing a cure to HIV and then marketing it to rich people. And then also not getting it to the more impoverished sectors of the global world. If he was really about that bag.
Oh, Sam, trust me, no spoons are wasted on trolls. I really don't care. Like, they can endlessly comment and just spam the chat. Like,
what is the spoon? Is that like we're all like eating from like the same like little pot or something like that? Is that what is a spoon?
Oh no, it's like it's like a mental health thing where it's just like, yeah, you only have so many spoons in a day to deal with like stressors and shit like that. Opinion with AZ is the new all under the username Passadabot. It's been banned in 37 plus channels, including Pinko the Bear. I know Pinko. Levelhead, Idan Simpson, Unelectable Airways. Oh, I know like all these people. All right, I guess fuck it. Should we just leave them banned?
Yeah, just fuck it. We made it,
Fuck
right?
it. Okay.
Is this like a sign of our ascendance?
Yeah, I hope so.
Is like, if like, do we occupy the same lofty echelons as these other individuals?
I can only hope because, like, as far as I know, Pinko, I don't know Alila's Crying, I don't know USA Hole, I don't know Levelhead, but I know Idan Simpson, he's chill. Unelectable Airwaves, Matt is legit. Zach App, is funny, he's like Australian. Riverboat Jack, I've never heard of, but Rob Rousseau is like, I'm like a dedicated fan. I'm a TRRS head, and Left Hand Stu is legit. Out of all like the culture crew, I still fuck with Stu.
Could you imagine like resigning yourself to that that recreational activity?
Like what? To just like spamming like
I could see doing it every once in a while, like if you're like a kid and you like just like being a jokester, but like that's almost 40 channels of like the same like politically. It's like it's almost like you wake up in the morning and like crack your knuckle. Oh, you like, all right, time to hit the grind again. Let me
time to start harassing people on the internet.
It's an on-stage work, but
yeah,
you gotta do it.
Fucking it's tough getting off the getting laid off from the racism factory and then having to harass a bunch of leftist Twitch streamers like are nominally all in their 30s.
Yeah. All right.
All right. So I guess should we move on to the end of did your mic literally just like fall off the fucking table?
Well, I have the mic, but my thing fell off. Hold on.
I'm amazed that you have as many issues with like your not cheap like mic and fucking like arm stand. My shit's like fucking I don't know. I think the most expensive part is like the mic, and it's like years old, and it's like a podcasting mic, and like my stand with all its fucking springs and shit.
For me, it's
just
the ghost.
Just fine.
The ghost of Perenni.
Yeah.
It messes with my mic. I'm constantly moving it, so the thing gets loose.
I wish we had, technical difficulties slide that we could throw up right now with like the little music.
It's like a cat batting around a little piece of yarn that just occupies the screen while I do this.
Like the little music tune going while I'm surprised he wasn't banned from fucking Famous Horse. That's like the only person on that list that like wasn't on there that I follow.
Okay. We're back.
All right, so I think like we're up to what, End of Democracy?
One moment. Let me get my PDF back up. Right. Well, End of Democracy is something that I already went through a little bit with all this stuff with NAFTA in Mexico and the deleterious effects that NAFTA had there.
Yeah, but we didn't finish because we did not go over the the sovereign immunity status and all that other shit.
So now we're going to get to the International Center for Settlement and Investment Disputes, which is overseen by the World Bank, which if you weren't here for the last stream, I'm sorry, I can't go into any more detail about the World Bank and how terrible they are. We covered that. If you want to revisit last week's or last Wednesday's stream, we go into that in detail. But just the fact that this organization is also headed by the World Bank speaks volumes to their lack of credibility and the lack of their ethical integrity. The idea was that in cases of expropriation, states would be obligated to compensate investors at a fair value for their property. Each dispute would be worked out by 3 arbitrators, 1 picked by each side, and a 3rd agreed upon by them. But when NAFTA came online, this arbitration system took on a disturbing twist. Investors started to file suits not only in cases of expropriation referring to when a nation realizes they've had enough being exploited by some kind of foreign corporation in their land and decides that they're going to nationalize it. That's what they mean by expropriation. Not only in cases of expropriation, but also to push back against environmental and social regulations that they claim reduced their profits, or even bizarrely, their expected future profits. This reminds me of like this reminds me of like the tallying of certain death tolls and things like that, where like
the what is it, the Black Book of Communism or whatever? That, like, those hypothetical Nazis that were killed by the Soviet Union each could have had 3 to 5 children.
Children.
So those hypothetical children, they're victims of communism.
Yeah. And so this is like the hypothetical profits that the future profits that may or may not have existed are also being arbitrated on. One famous early case involved Metalclad, a U.S. corporation that was operating a hazardous waste landfill in Mexico. When it became clear that the landfill was polluting the local water supply and causing nearby residents to fall sick with aggressive diseases, the municipal government closed it down and declared the area a protected environment. In response, Metalclad sued, claiming the decision amounted to an expropriation of the company's land and facilities. Mexico was forced to pay $15.6 million in damages for recognizing a toxic waste landfill was making their individuals sick. The profits would have children, and those children would have made profits. In another case, the US-based company Dow AgroSciences sued the government of Canada for banning the use of its pesticides on the basis they might cause cancer in humans. All of these cases follow the same pattern. Corporations sue the state for domestic laws that limit their expected future profits, even when the laws are meant to protect human rights, public health, or the environment. One last example of this, there's NAFTA, but then this is actually, it's similar to NAFTA, but in Central America. It's like the Central American Free Trade Agreement. So in El Salvador, citizens recently voted to ban a gold mine planned by Pacific Rim, a Canadian corporation. First of all, fuck Canadian mining companies. If you go to Guatemala, Canadian mining companies are pieces of shit that fund anti-labor shit. There's even murders that occur for union activists and things like that that are suspected to be at the behest of individuals that are in cahoots with these mining companies. Canada also does this in Burkina Faso and other places. So Canada is definitely advancing a lot of these neo-colonial imperialist structures throughout the Third World. Pacific Rim, okay. In El Salvador, they wanted to ban it because it threatened to destroy a part of the country's river system. Pacific Rim is now suing El Salvador for $315 million in potential lost profits. And then also, the U.S.-Peru FTA has recently been used by the American company Doe Run to sue the Peruvian government. The government had found Doe Run liable for high levels of pollution, including lead, from its metal smelters, which had caused 162 local children to become severely ill. Doe Run not only sought to evade liability, but bizarrely turned around and sued the government for damages. Fortunately, the company lost, but the whole ordeal gives an indication of the Alice in Wonderland nature of investor-state disputes that currently exist. So, this whole idea of pursuing these noble causes of liberal trade markets, democracy, freedom around the world, does it seem very liberal or freedom centric or democratic to go into Mexico and be like, oh, is our toxic waste making your children sick? Well, guess what? Oh, you want to close it down? $315 million. You owe us that now if you don't want your children to be sick. Because apparently I have this right to do this. My corporation has the right to do this on your land.
I think like the most interesting aspect of all of this is, I'm sorry, Lily, did you want to say anything? Did you want to add?
No, I just wanted to give you an update on Mr. Armed.
Yeah.
He sent us a private message saying to let him have his opinions and to stop censoring people. Free speech.
Sick.
Well,
Well,
here's another account. Look at that.
Can we
did he
make
really?
Let me have my freedom of speech. Soy boy duo can't handle opinions.
That's awesome. And it's not soy, it's oat. I'm a huge oat milk fan.
I actually consume a lot of soy, but you know, if you wanted to like wrestle or something like that, we could do that.
I mean, you guys can feel free to tussle with this guy if you want me to leave him unbanned, but
No, I don't give a shit.
The only way that I would actually want to continue with him is if he like came on and like spoke to me. Like there's no point in like, you know, getting in like to like some kind of like dude, I wish I could eat pea protein. I'm allergic to peas.
He's like literally
no.
Pat would be vegan if not for the fact that like
I've been vegan for a while now.
right. But like it's tough on you because, you know, everything uses like, you know, pea protein and shit.
Yeah.
ooh, he called me a femoid, so that's a block from me.
All right.
Yep.
No, it's one thing if he's gonna come after us, but if he's gonna come after Lily, no, fuck it.
And also Lily, like, you know what I mean? Just because you banned him and we said like we wouldn't have, like, you have like autonomy that if you feel like something's like out of there, like, we're never gonna come down and be like, no, you can't do that. Like if something makes you like, you're like, I don't want that in the chat, take it out. We'll never be like, no, you can't do that. And especially if he starts insulting you like that, like, you know.
I appreciate that. I do want to give you guys autonomy to be able to interact with assholes if you want, but
Sometimes it's
as
fun.
this is an educational stream, I figured that was probably better to just keep it civil. So
Yeah, like we're definitely like we're down for it, you know, like we're putting our faces out here and shit. But like if they're gonna come after you, nah, fuck them.
Yeah,
love you, Will. I know you would. That's my homeboy.
all right, I'll let you guys get back to it.
All right. But I think like the most interesting aspect about this, how does NAFTA, how does the WTO, like, you know, settle these disputes where like countries are like, no, stop poisoning our children, get the fuck out of here. Like, so in 1965, they came up with a way to work such disputes out in the orderly environs of a court, the International Centre for Settlement of Investment Disputes, or the ICSD, or the ICSID, which would be overseen by the World Bank. States would be obligated to compensate investors at a fair value for their property. And the funniest part about this is,
I think I think a couple people might have tried that.
What year did the Cuban Revolution happen?
1959.
Right. And it's funny that like 5 years later, 6 years later, that like, you know, they would come out with this, because I think like one of the big things about like, you know, even like in the hypothetical scenarios that like the Cuban people decide that like they no longer wish to pursue a socialist, you know, project, if they were to, you know, return to the fold of, you know, the U.S. hegemony, they would actually like have to repay all of the businesses, right, or the descendants of those businesses
Bacardi's going to come down and be like, you owe us about 40 years of profit that we hypothetically would have garnished.
Yes, with interest. They would have to pay it back. I'm not fucking around. You look it up. Like, they would have to pay it all back with interest.
I take umbrage with this whole situation, because in many circumstances, projects of nationalization in Latin America did pay back, did compensate. Allende attempted this, Arbenz attempted this, and every time it wasn't good enough. It wasn't
never be good enough. Ever. You'll never, it'll never be good enough. The whole point of all of this, if it hasn't been abundantly clear from every other chapter we've gone over, is to permanently subdue you economically, that you will be stuck, subservient.
Look at Cuba and look at Haiti. Look at Cuba and look at Jamaica. Like, and I compare these as other Caribbean nations, which have like a markedly different outcome in terms of you know, social factors and things like that.
Fuck that. Look at Puerto Rico and look at Cuba.
Was that?
Look at Puerto Rico and look at Cuba. Look at like the Dominican Republic and look at Cuba. Those three nations, all three of them at various levels were, or at various times, right, were subject to America's foreign policy, right? And
Well,
the same time,
Haiti has been Haiti, Grenada,
right.
all of these nations have been. There's not a nation that exists. I mean, at this point, I struggle to think of a single nation in the world that has not been meddled in by the United States, other than the ones maybe like the Western European ones that acquiesced to American domination because they get a high seat at the table of imperialism.
Right.
You know, especially when you read a book like Killing Hope by William Blum. Sometimes you don't realize it. But you're like, oh wow, Albania too, huh? Oh wow, Yemen too, huh? Oh wow, Uruguay. Like, you know what I mean? It's like because there's marquee ones that everybody knows about. Like a lot of people know about Chile, a lot of people know about Iran, a lot of people know about Guatemala. Obviously, there's the Vietnam War and the Korean War. But then like there's like these like micro examples that go so far. Like even Bishop in Grenada, even the situation in Panama that happened with Noriega. It's like there's more well-known ones, but then there's like Italy, exactly. Wilkovi, exactly. Like when you go through Killing Hope, it's so exhaustive, and it's like it almost refers to every country in the world.
I'm trying to find the book. I think it was called like Killing Fields is like another big one that I've heard about lately. Yeah, but so
but not directly or indirectly, there has been like American destabilization in pretty much every single country.
Yeah. And let's see, in the year, what the hell is it? In 2012, there were 59, up from the 51 the previous year of these disputes being filed with the ICSID, the ICSID. And guess how many there were in 2021?
2.
There were 66 new arbitration cases in 2021 under the ICSID convention, eclipsing the last year's record of 58 new cases. And you can look this up. It's under like the icsid.worldbank.org. Like it's pretty easy. Yeah, you were close.
Italy, weird thing about Italy is that after Mussolini and after communists drug him through the streets and hung him from a light post, communism was actually pretty popular in Italy following the whole debacle of World War II, much like how communism was popular in Greece, much how communism was popular in the Yugoslavian nations, the nations that were ravaged by the Nazi scourge, and the communists offered a extremely principled and organized retaliation towards the Nazi empire. Communism was extremely favorable in a lot of these countries. And then the United States organized a campaign of anti-democracy and anti-freedom to remove the self-determination of those countries to elect a communist government. And this is exactly what happened in Italy. That is detailed in
it's like kind of fucked up. Like, yeah, communism was like fairly popular in Italy, especially after and even like arguably during Mussolini. How else would he have ever even rose to power if not by adopting like socialist terms and aesthetics? But nobody ever really talks about Francisco Franco, the Caudillo of España.
I know very little about that.
Do you know what year he died?
No.
Dude,
he's still
1975.
Wow.
He ruled over Spain from 1939 to 1975 as a dictator.
Wait, he was in power the whole time till 1975?
Yeah,
holy shit.
Yeah, he was never punished or anything. He never like faced any. He died like peacefully in his sleep. There was no jail time. There was no
Pinochet. Did you know that like Margaret Thatcher pretty much like brought Pinochet into England to like care for him in his like old and like sickly state? So like, yeah, and then same thing with Rios Montt, or Rios Montt never had to answer for the fucking disgusting genocidal policies that he implemented in Guatemala. And this is even now you see Blaise Compaoré is now was sentenced to life in Burkina Faso for his assassination of Thomas Sankara, but he's currently sheltered He's currently sheltered in the Ivory Coast, receiving no punishment whatsoever. He was sentenced in absentia.
Is he still alive? No
Who?
way. I thought he died. Yeah.
I thought
shit, he's still alive. No, he's still alive. You're right.
I just wrote about this for my African history class.
God damn. Well, I mean, that's also like, you know, all the dudes behind like Unit 731 in Japan and like, you know, all the other like fucked up shit they did in
Those
Japan.
guys ended up getting like subsumed into like, you know, esteemed positions in U.S. U.S. stuff. The ones that weren't put to death in the Soviet Union, that is.
Right. But you know,
So,
that's a whole other book for another stream. The other guy that like he brings up later in the book, while talking about the ICSID, is Alfred de Zayas, a UN special rapporteur, recently slammed investor-state dispute settlement provisions as a threat to human rights and a violation of international law. In the United States, more than 100 law professors have signed a letter to Congress pointing out that such provisions pose a threat to national sovereignty and rule of law.
But it's not a threat to national sovereignty when I import my toxic waste into your children's backyard and
Right.
You want to get rid of it and I won't let you. Is that does that impugn on your sovereignty at all?
Yeah, I'm also interested to see like what happened to the tenure of these 100 law professors after signing that letter to Congress. But you know, probably didn't end too well for them. Go over Operation Paperclip. So right now we're covering what the fuck is this? The Divide by Jason Hickel, not Jackson Hinkle. And sadly, he doesn't really mention Operation Paperclip in
tragically,
but we have gone over it in previous streams, and I'm hoping that maybe sometime either this coming week or next week we're going to upload a lot of our old episodes onto YouTube, and hopefully we don't get DCMA striked.
So I'm at the end of my notes. Is there anything else that you want to go over? I feel like we did all right for me having like sparse preparation.
You did great, man. Don't worry about it. But like
I've written like 2,000 words in essays this weekend. Hey,
see Winrich, I wish it was morning.
Where are you that it's currently the morning? I'm very curious. You don't have to get too descriptive, but just like what if it's the morning, you can just like allude to a vague time zone because I'm just curious where you may live.
So he goes on to talk about how the only reason we know anything about any of this shit, like the transatlantic trade and investment partnership or any of this shit, is because of whistleblowers, right? And what happens to whistleblowers, especially in the U.S.?
They have to go and live in Venezuela.
Yeah, right. And just like hide out in the
early morning, the early morning in Germany. Welcome. I'm very grateful to have you in the stream. Thank you.
Wild. Thank you for joining us. So like he goes over like the TTIP, which is, and the TPP, which is kind of like the update of NAFTA. Right, and I think there's another one that came up too. I don't know why, but I want to say USMCA or whatever. I feel like that's just the United States Marine Corps. Wait, it is the USMCA. It's primarily modernization of the 25-year-old NAFTA, namely to respect intellectual property and digital trade, and borrows language for the comprehensive and progressive agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership, of which Canada and Mexico are signatories. I'm sure it's going to work out great for Mexico. The primary aim of the TTIP, for instance, is not to reduce trade tariffs, as these are already minimal levels, but rather to reduce any barriers to corporate profit maximization, labor laws, digital privacy laws, environmental protections, food safety standards, and financial regulations. The TTIP could make it illegal for governments to stop commercial banks from engaging in securities trading, which was one of the main causes of the 2008 financial crisis. Prevent governments from limiting the size of banks, and will prohibit the proposed Robin Hood tax on financial transactions. So pretty much we're just recreating like crashes of the US economy, but forcing it upon other countries.
Yeah, exporting the economic downfall, the suffering that's associated with economic issues gets exported to other countries. I've heard it described like this before too. Everybody wants to point at other nations, maybe with different economic organization, as like, oh, these are starvation. Like, oh, if you implement this, people starve and things like this. Whereas, the United States just exports its starvation. The United States economic policy also causes starvation. They just export it into the third world for them to endure it.
Yeah,
the TTIP is basically U.S. corps can expand in other countries that have to obey other countries. Yes, absolutely.
Yes. Laws for thee, but not for me.
Exactly. It's a recurring theme in this climate of economic policy.
So the next chapter is the virtual Senate.
Oh, by the way, I did find an online PDF. If anybody's interested, I just put it in chat. There's a WordPress file. If anybody wants to read along, like Johnny's about to say, then what the next chapter is, you can read along with us if you want to prepare yourself for next Wednesday's stream where we go over the next chapter. If you have anything that you like about it or anything that you want to discuss, feel free to contribute.
Yeah, no, we would love that. Like, please do. If you want to read along, even if you got to like skip ahead, because I know we're like fairly late into the book, and if you just want to like start from where we're at, like that's cool. All right, but like we would love to have a lot more participation from everybody in chat, especially in relation like to the book, because like I feel like maybe there's stuff that we're missing that you think is actually way more important, because obviously me and Pat always have like a difference of like what stands out to us during reading these books. So give it a shot. For the next part, like the virtual Senate, I feel like he talked about it somewhere that he took the idea or the phrase from like a Chomsky writing or something, but I can't find it. Chlorine chicken and hormone-filled meat was a big issue over here. What, in Deutschland?
In Alemania.
Alejania.
In Guatemala, they call, I think in other Spanish-speaking countries, they refer to Germany as Alemania. I don't know if Steve and Rick can speak to that, but that's what UE in general. Oh, the problem. Right. Okay.
So, what the hell is it? The states decided the terms by which foreign investors were allowed to send capital in to set up business or buy up shares of local companies, which only makes the problem worse. Free trade reforms have gradually dismantled these capital controls and putting money in and pulling it out wherever and whenever they please. Abolishing capital controls has transferred an enormous amount of power to international investors. Think about it. If you're an investor and assuming all you care about is profit, you're going to channel your money into countries with what are euphemistically referred to as business-friendly measures like low wages, low taxes, cheap resources, and so on. Investors can effectively conduct moment-by-moment referendums to decisions made by voters or governments around the world. Investors operate as a kind of virtual Senate, sitting in their high-rise offices in places like London, New York, Frankfurt, Hong Kong. They are the ones who ultimately decide on economic policy in countries around the world, which brings us to the tool in which they use to make these decisions, which is a website, or I think he says it's an app too, which I didn't bother to check, called Doing Business Report, a controversial document that ranks the world's countries every year based on the ease of doing business in them. For the most part, the fewer regulations a country has, the higher they score. Did you have anything that you wanted to add about any of this?
I do, actually, and it's not to speak to that directly, but it's regarding something else that I've heard, and I think that the where I first heard this is there's a debate between Richard Wolff and the Whole Foods CEO. And this Whole Foods CEO guy, he also wrote some kind of like book about ethical capitalism or something like that. And how like, you know, there's a way to like be super cool and sell organic fruit, but also be a capitalist or whatever his fucking thing is. Even though it's like he sold his company to Amazon, right? I guess Amazon owns Whole Foods now. I'm pretty sure.
I thought everything was owned by Disney now.
What?
I thought everything was owned by Disney now. Like we're all just living in Disney World.
But he would keep bringing up this thing called the Economic Freedom Index, and he would refer to this as like would be like, well, the capitalist countries are the most economically free in this ranking, and oh, look at that, Venezuela and Cuba and all these other ones are at the very bottom. So that is like, you know, the bottom of the list must mean bad. Line go down in list.
Line go down.
And it turns out that this is a tabulation that is conducted by the Heritage Foundation, which, if you know about the Heritage Foundation, it's a libertarian think tank that generally just espouses other free market ideologue information.
Free market.
And they use a similar criterion as this business. What is it called? Business Insider. What is it called?
Doing business, dude.
Right.
I can pull up do you want to pull up the website?
Sure. But whereas this app, you know, is something that can be used for like businesses to decide where they may want to invest, where there won't be any kind of like pesky national or socialistic, okay, hold on one second. You know, interference with human rights, or, you know, not wanting to pollute children's drinking water. You can find that, but for the Heritage Foundation, it's more of like, I think, like a propaganda tool, in the sense that like it kind of provides this thing, like this guy was weaponizing it in this debate to be like, well, because it has the word freedom in there, like this like very like propagandistic loaded term. One second, I'm pulling it up now.
What's that scene from Futurama? Freedom, 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 oi.
There we go.
The ease of doing business scores.
So, like, do I get to... Wait.
It's crazy because I think you can just hit like the DB 2020, and I guess that's the most recent data that they have. I don't know if there's like some kind of paywall or some shit, but I'll unalive myself before I pay anything for any of this shit.
See that all the data running for topics, indicator values. So what country should we do? You gonna do
I don't know.
Cuba? You want to see how Cuba is?
They got China.
Do they not even have Cuba on here?
I don't even think Cuba's on there. I think because they're under sanction and embargo, they can't.
Let's do
Do they have Syria?
Do they have Syria? I don't know. Let's see. They have Yemen.
I think I noticed that they had Vietnam.
They have the Syrian Arab Republic. I'm curious what like something like Burkina Faso is, just because it's like you can probably invest there very easily. They have a higher score than Syria.
Higher score.
Yeah. I don't know. I probably should have. We probably should have like figured out how this thing works before we pulled it up, because I'm just kind of like shooting around it and I don't really know exactly.
You see, Pat, right? Even though this thing has literally been criticized, like how it literally is against the basic labor rights enshrined in the UN's International Labor Organization conventions, the World Bank backed down and removed the indicator.
Here we go. I wanted to see the rank
from the ranks, right?
New Zealand's number one.
And like he goes on to talk about how like they encourage countries to abolish minimum wages entirely, zero taxation. They want to cut out all tariffs. They not just like fewer regulations. They want like total freedom of purchase. Like they want to be able to just like roll into a country and just buy up everything, right? And you want to know like what all of this is based on?
How willing a country is to allow a corporation to pillage its resources.
No. You're thinking far too materially. You know how like before, finally, like there was a Karl Marx quote, in this book, nearly finishing it, right? All of this is actually from just two people that invented it.
Oh, wow.
Simeon Djankov and Andrei Schleifer.
Just those two?
Just those two. And like literally when you look them up, let me see if I can post it in chat. You can actually find them on YouTube pretty easily, but I'm not pulling it up. I'm not watching like an hour of some fucking, ghoul talk about how like the world would be a better place without any kind of protections for anybody. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Oh shit.
So the what the hell is it? This virtual Senate, right, of rich, wealthy people enjoys the power to get countries to impose neoliberalism on themselves. Simply by controlling the flow of capital. And it becomes clear that the extension of neoliberalism has entailed powerful new forms of state intervention. Totalizing global bureaucracy, the World Bank, the IMF, the WTO, and bilateral free trade agreements with a ream of new laws backed up by the military power of the United States. Free trade has a tendency to gradually undermine national sovereignty and electoral democracy. Most free trade zones are that this causes, right, are covered by barbed wire fences and walls and often patrolled by private security forces. National law enforcement agencies are not allowed to pass through their gates, right? And 4,300 such zones in nearly 150 countries exist. These free trade zones are only enclaves, of course, but they offer us a rather horrifying glimpse of what the world might become if the logic of free trade is extended unchecked. Pretty much what a lot of this leads to is like a Milton Friedman wet dream, or just like a global fucking nightmare world.
Yep. The free marketeer dystopia will have been realized.
Yeah, pretty much. But like, I'm very grateful to see the world.
Why is there a World Bank logo up here?
Oh, because the World Bank was using this for a long time as a means of establishing who deserves aid. See, when countries were ranking high on this weird hell site, that would actually mean that they are more deserving of more aid than countries that were ranking low on the doing business hell site.
Okay. Well, I think I'm just about at my exhaustion here after typing essays for school all morning and then engaging in this presentation. Did you reach the end of your notes?
Yeah, that's it. And that's kind of like the end for us. I know it's not like a 4-hour stream, but we're at like 3 hours. Pat, who has like a life outside of the internet, unlike me, he's a little exhausted. Look at him, folks. Look at him yawning. Look how tuckered out he is.
You hit me at once too. It's like I think my adrenaline like kept me up for like the stream, like whatever like performance anxiety that comes in from like talking in front of people. But then like I think I just started ramping down, and then it just kind of like just dominated me, and I'm like yawning constantly.
Honestly,
So I'm
this chapter compared to the others is it's not nearly as heavy, right?
Yeah.
The other ones literally are just like not even just like info heavy, but also just like emotionally like it takes a toll on you. But this one is this one just kind of cements that horror, right?
Right.
So I hope that like you guys enjoyed this, right? Please thank you so much for everybody that subscribed today, and thank you for everybody that like was telling your friends and helping spread the word about our Twitch stream.
Thank you, guys.
Every Wednesday, every Sunday we go
Thank
live at 6 p.m. for the first
Sam.
half hour.
Sam,
Thank you.
Dorian, Vlad, Wolf Skeptic, and then C. Wenrick. I'm so sorry. I'm not if I'm not pronouncing that correctly. Thank you for being here. Appreciate everybody that participated and has been here with us. Check back in with us Wednesday night. We are in like the last like 80 pages of this book. We'll have it done this week, and then we'll be embarking on a new book, which we announced earlier. If for those of you that weren't here, we're going to be doing. We decided on Horn. Yeah, we're going to be doing the Counter Revolution of 1776 by Gerald Horn. It's a counter history into what is commonly purported by mainstream sources of the American Revolution. Oh, Frankster says, "What's up? I didn't even know you were here today."
Frank's there. It's good to see you.
Yeah, we will be embarking on that. So hopefully you hang with us for the last 2 chapters of this book, and then we'll be beginning the new discussion next week. So talk to you guys soon, Wednesday. Appreciate everything. Have a good night.
If all goes well, we're gonna invite Gerald Horn on, but I think I want to try and do a raid. Lily, are you still with us? Are you still there? How the hell? I'm trying to figure out how to do a goddamn raid. If it's the last goddamn thing I do.
We're looking to do a raid.
Yeah, can we raid a famous horse?
Famous horse.
Yes.
We are not following them. Oh wait, no. Yes, we are. Okay. All right. Good night, everybody. 5 seconds. No. We're good, actually. You guys just say goodbye.
Bye. Bye, everybody.
Good
Here we
night,
go.
everybody.
Well, no.